When rancher Ethan Cole found the woman standing barefoot in the middle of that frozen road, wearing nothing but a torn wedding dress and 2 years of silence, he knew his carefully rebuilt life was about to shatter. His 6-year-old son recognized her first, the woman who had vanished without a word, leaving Ethan to raise Lucas alone. But Clara Hale wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be married, settled, gone. Instead, she stood like a ghost made flesh, her feet bleeding onto the snow, her eyes holding secrets that would unravel everything Ethan thought he knew about betrayal, love, and the letters that never came. Stay until the end to discover the truth that was stolen from them. Like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, sharp-toothed and hungry, cutting through Ethan Cole's heavy coat as if the wool were nothing more than cobwebs. He hunched forward on the wagon seat, reins wrapped around his gloved hands, and squinted against the late afternoon glare that turned the snow-covered plain into a field of broken mirrors. Beside him, bundled in a patchwork quilt that had belonged to his grandmother, 6-year-old Lucas pressed close, small enough that the cold still found him despite Ethan's best efforts. "Papa, my feet are cold," Lucas said, his voice muffled by the scarf wound around his face. "I know, buddy. Almost home." Ethan's breath clouded white in the frigid air. Another mile, maybe less. It had been a longer trip to town than he'd planned. The mercantile had been out of the lamp oil he needed, forcing him to try the general store on the far side of the settlement. Then the blacksmith had wanted to discuss the plow blade Ethan had ordered, and old Mrs. Henderson had cornered him outside the post office to talk about the church social. Though Ethan had stopped attending those months ago, tired of the well-meaning widows who kept suggesting he needed a wife, that Lucas needed a mother. Lucas had a mother once. She'd died bringing him into the world, and Ethan had loved her with the fierce, uncomplicated devotion of a young man who didn't yet know how complicated love could become. Her name had been Sarah, and she'd been good and kind, and gone before Ethan really understood what he had. After Sarah, there had been Clara. Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't let himself think about Clara anymore. Thinking about her was like pressing on a bruise that never quite healed. It served no purpose except to remind him that some wounds ran deeper than others. The horses plodded forward, their breath steaming, hooves crunching through the crusty top layer of week-old snow. The road stretched ahead, a pale ribbon cutting through the winter-dead grassland. In the distance, the Rocky Mountains rose like broken teeth against the darkening sky. Beautiful and brutal, like everything else in this country. "Papa." Lucas sat up straighter, the quilt slipping from his shoulders. "Papa, look." "What is it?" Ethan didn't take his eyes off the road. The wagon wheels had found a rut, and he was guiding them out carefully. Last thing he needed was a broken axle out here with darkness coming on and the temperature already dropping. "There's somebody." Lucas pointed ahead, his small arm emerging from the quilt. "Right there, in the road." Ethan looked up. For a moment he thought the cold had gotten to him, that his mind was playing tricks the way it sometimes did in the thin air and bitter wind, because what he saw made no sense. A woman stood in the middle of the road, perhaps 50 yards ahead. She wasn't moving, just standing there perfectly still, as if she'd been carved from the same stone as the distant mountains. Even from this distance, Ethan could see she wore no coat, no shoes. Her dress, if you could call it that, was white, or had been once. Now it was torn and stained, hanging from her frame in ragged strips that moved in the wind like wounded birds trying to fly. "Papa?" Lucas's voice carried a tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. Ethan pulled the wagon to a halt, his heart suddenly loud in his ears. The woman didn't move, didn't wave or call out or show any sign she'd noticed them at all. She simply stood there, her dark hair whipping around her face, her arms wrapped around herself in a gesture that was either protection or despair. "Stay here." Ethan set the brake and climbed down from the wagon, his boots hitting the frozen ground with a solid crunch. His hand went instinctively to the rifle he kept beneath the seat, not drawing it, but needing the reassurance that it was there. You didn't survive long in this country without learning caution. He walked toward the woman, each step deliberate, his eyes scanning the surrounding landscape for any sign of trouble. Bandits sometimes used women as bait, though that was more common further south. Out here, the dangers were usually more straightforward. Weather, isolation, the occasional cattle thief. 20 yards away now, 15. The woman's feet were bare against the frozen road, and even from this distance, Ethan could see they were bleeding, leaving small dark spots in the snow. Her skin was deathly pale, lips blue with cold. The dress she wore, he could see it clearly now, was fancy, ceremonial, the kind of dress a woman wore for a wedding, the kind of dress that cost more than Ethan made in 3 months. 10 yards. She raised her head, and Ethan's world stopped. He knew that face. Every line, every curve, every expression it could make. From joy to sorrow to the particular way her brow furrowed when she was thinking hard about something. He knew the exact shade of her eyes, the color of autumn leaves just before they fell. He knew the small scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen from a horse as a child, the slight crookedness of her smile that had always made his chest tight. He knew, because he'd spent 18 months memorizing that face, believing it would be the last face he'd ever want to memorize. Clara. The name left his mouth as barely more than a whisper, stolen by the wind. Clara Hale, who had disappeared from his life 2 years ago without explanation or goodbye, stood before him like something conjured from his worst memories. She was thinner than he remembered, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin that looked almost translucent. Her dark hair, which she'd always worn pinned up in careful arrangements, hung loose and tangled past her shoulders. The wedding dress, because that's what it was, he could see the fine lace detail now despite the tears and stains, hung from her frame as if it had been made for someone else. But it was her eyes that broke him. Those familiar hazel eyes that looked at him with such desperate recognition, such profound exhaustion, that Ethan felt something crack open in his chest that he'd thought he'd sealed shut forever. Ethan. Her voice was rough, barely audible. You came. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what to think. Clara, where have you... She swayed, and Ethan lunged forward, catching her as her knees gave out. She weighed almost nothing, all bones and cold skin, and when he wrapped his arms around her, he could feel her shaking, not just from the cold, but something deeper, something that came from the core of her. I couldn't, she whispered against his chest. I couldn't run anymore. I just kept walking, and then I saw your wagon, and I thought I was dreaming again. Papa! Lucas's voice carried across the distance. Papa, is she hurt? Clara stiffened in Ethan's arms, trying to pull back, trying to look toward the wagon. Lucas, she breathed. Oh God, he's gotten so big. Ethan's mind reeled. Clara remembered Lucas. Of course she did. She'd known him when he was barely 4 years old, small enough to hide behind Ethan's legs, curious enough to follow Clara around like a duckling whenever she visited the ranch. But that had been 2 years ago, and Lucas was 6 now, and Clara had left. No. Ethan's thoughts stumbled over themselves. Clara hadn't just left, she'd vanished. One day she was there talking about spring planting and laughing at Lucas's attempt to whistle, and the next day her family's house stood empty, her father's store closed, and the rumors had spread through town like wildfire. The Hales went east, sold everything overnight. Debt, people said. Bad investments, gone before the sheriff could ask questions. And Clara had gone with them, without a word, without a letter. Without anything at all to explain why the woman who'd kissed Ethan beside the creek just 3 days before, who'd talked about forever like it was something they could actually have, would disappear as if he'd meant nothing. Ethan had told himself he'd gotten his answer in that silence. People didn't vanish from the lives of those they loved. They stayed, or they explained, or at the very least they said goodbye. But now Clara was here, in his arms, wearing a wedding dress that wasn't meant for him, her feet bleeding and her body shaking, and nothing made sense. Can you walk? He asked, hating how rough his voice sounded. She nodded, but when he tried to release her, her legs wouldn't hold. Ethan bent and lifted her. She really did weigh almost nothing, and carried her toward the wagon. Behind them, her footprints in the snow told a story he wasn't ready to read yet, a trail of blood and desperation that stretched back toward the mountains and whatever she'd been running from. Lucas had climbed into the back of the wagon, making space among the supplies. His eyes were huge in his small face, fixed on Clara with an expression Ethan couldn't quite name. Recognition, maybe, or memory. Lucas had asked about Clara for months after she'd left, wanting to know when the nice lady who tells stories would come back. Eventually, he'd stopped asking. "It's okay, son," Ethan said, though he had no idea if it was. "We're taking her home." He settled Clara into the wagon bed, wrapping her in the quilt Lucas had been using and every other blanket he could find. Her feet were worse than he'd thought, cut and bruised, some of the wounds still bleeding sluggishly. How far had she walked? How long had she been out here? "Clara," he kept his voice gentle, the way he would with a spooked horse. "Clara, we need to get you warm. I'm taking you to the ranch. Do you understand?" She nodded, her eyes drifting closed. For a horrible moment, Ethan thought she'd lost consciousness, but then she spoke, so quietly he had to lean close to hear. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I knew if I could just hold on long enough, you'd come." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her he hadn't come, that he'd just been driving home from town, that this was coincidence or fate or blind luck. He wanted to ask her where she'd been, why she'd left, whose wedding dress she was wearing. He wanted to demand explanations for 2 years of silence. Instead, he said, "I've got you now. You're safe." It might have been a lie. He didn't know what she was running from, didn't know what finding her like this meant, but it was the only thing he could think to say that might bring some peace to the terror he saw lurking behind her exhaustion. Lucas touched Clara's hand, his small fingers barely brushing her knuckles. "You're the story lady," he said softly. "I remember you." Clara's eyes opened, focusing on the boy with an intensity that made Ethan's chest ache. "Lucas," she said, "you remember. You told me about the bear and the rabbit, and the star that fell in love with the river." "I did." A tear slid down Clara's cheek, cutting a clean line through the dust on her face. "You have a good memory." "Papa says I get that from Mama." Lucas glanced at Ethan, uncertain. "She died when I was born, but Papa says she was real smart." "She was," Clara agreed. "And so are you." Ethan climbed back onto the wagon seat, his hands shaking as he gathered the reins. The simple exchange between Clara and Lucas had undone something in him, some careful wall he'd built. He'd forgotten how natural she'd been with his son, how Lucas had bloomed under her attention in a way he never quite did with anyone else. He'd forgotten a lot of things, made himself forget, more like. The horses started forward, and Ethan guided them carefully, avoiding the worst of the ruts. Every jolt made him wince, knowing Clara was being rattled around in the back. But there was no help for it. They needed to get home, needed to get her warm, and tended to before the cold did any more damage. The sun was setting now, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful if Ethan had been in any state to notice. Instead, he kept glancing back at the wagon bed where Lucas sat beside Clara, chattering quietly about the ranch and his pony and the kittens that had been born in the barn last month. Clara listened, or appeared to, though her eyes kept drifting shut. Each time they did, Ethan's heart would clench, and he'd have to force himself to keep the horses at a steady pace instead of whipping them into a run. "She's alive," he told himself. "Whatever else is true, she's alive, and you're getting her home." The ranch buildings came into view as full darkness fell. The main house, the barn, the small bunkhouse where his foreman stayed. Ethan could see smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney. James would be there, probably reading or cleaning his rifle. James McKenna, who'd worked for Ethan for 5 years, who was reliable and steady and had never given Ethan a moment's trouble. James, who'd been there through all of it, through Sarah's death, through Ethan's slow recovery, through the 18 months when Clara had been a fixture at the ranch, through her disappearance and Ethan's silent grief. Ethan guided the wagon directly to the house, not wanting to waste time unhitching at the barn. He set the brake and jumped down, moving to the back where Clara lay wrapped in blankets, her breathing shallow. "Lucas, run ahead and get the fire built up. Put water on to heat." "Yes, Papa." The boy scrambled down and ran toward the house, his small legs pumping. Ethan gathered Clara carefully, blankets and all, and carried her toward the porch. She stirred in his arms, her head rolling against his shoulder. "Where?" "Home," he said, then corrected himself. "My home. The ranch." "I remember." Her hand emerged from the blankets, touching his face with fingers so cold they felt like ice. Ethan, I need to tell you. Later. Right now, we need to get you warm. He kicked the front door open, Lucas had left it ajar, and carried Clara into the main room. The house was exactly as he'd left it that morning. Clean but spare, functional rather than comfortable. A bachelor's house, people called it, though Ethan had never much cared what people called it. Lucas had gotten the fire going, feeding it kindling with the focused intensity he brought to tasks he deemed important. The flames were already catching, casting dancing shadows across the room. Good job, son. Now get those quilts from the chest in my room. Ethan laid Clara on the sofa, the same sofa where she used to sit and read to Lucas, where she'd fallen asleep one Sunday afternoon with sunshine on her face, and Ethan had stood watching her, thinking about rings and vows and forever. He pushed the memory away and focused on the practical necessities. Her feet needed attention first. He knelt beside the sofa and carefully unwrapped the blankets, exposing her damaged feet to the firelight. They were worse than he'd thought, cut, bruised, swollen. Some of the wounds looked days old, others fresh. She'd been walking for a long time. I need warm water and clean cloths, he called to Lucas, who appeared with an armload of quilts, and the medicine kit from the kitchen. While Lucas ran to obey, Ethan looked up at Clara's face. Her eyes were open, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You're going to think I'm crazy, she said. Try me. I ran away from my own wedding. Ethan sat back on his heels. Of all the explanations he'd been constructing in his mind, kidnapping, coercion, amnesia, he hadn't considered that one. Whose wedding? The question came out harder than he'd intended. Mine. To Marcus Thornton. Do you know him? Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew of Marcus Thornton. Everyone did. The Thorntons owned half of Colorado, or close enough, mines, railroads, land. They were the kind of wealthy that ordinary people couldn't quite comprehend, the kind that turned men into property and women into assets. I know of him. My father owed them money, a lot of money, bad investments, worse decisions. Clara's voice was flat, reciting facts. Marcus offered to forgive the debt if I married him. My father agreed. I wasn't given a choice. Lucas returned with the water and cloths, moving carefully to avoid spilling. Ethan took them with a nod of thanks, then gently lifted one of Clara's feet and began cleaning the wounds. She flinched but didn't pull away. When was the wedding? He asked, keeping his voice neutral. Today. This afternoon. She laughed, a brittle sound with no humor in it. I made it through the ceremony, stood there in that dress, and said the words they told me to say. But when we got to the house, when Marcus said it was time to, she stopped, swallowing hard. I couldn't. I climbed out a window and ran. Ethan's hand stilled on her foot. You climbed out a window in a wedding dress. Second floor. There was a trellis. She gestured vaguely at the tears in her dress. I tore it on the rose bushes, ruined it completely. It cost more than my father made in a year. Clara, Ethan didn't know what to say. The image of her climbing out a window, tearing her expensive dress, running in bare feet from a man she'd just married, it was both terrifying and somehow exactly what he would expect from the Clara he remembered. The Clara who'd once jumped into a freezing creek to save a drowning puppy. The Clara who'd stood up to a group of drunk cowboys harassing a Chinese family in town, armed with nothing but her sharp tongue and complete fearlessness. They'll be looking for me, she continued, the Thorntons. They don't let things go, especially not humiliation. How far did you run? I don't know, miles. I followed the road and then I cut across country when I saw riders. I thought they were from the Thornton Ranch. She closed her eyes. I kept thinking I'd find somewhere to hide, some town or farm or something, but everything was so empty, just snow and wind and nothing. Ethan finished cleaning her feet and wrapped them carefully in clean bandages. They'd need more tending later. Some of those cuts might need stitches, but this would do for now. Papa? Lucas stood nearby, holding a cup of water. Should I give this to her? Yes. Thank you. Ethan took the cup and helped Clara sit up enough to drink. She sipped slowly, as if she'd forgotten how. Lucas, Clara said when she'd finished, you've been very helpful. Thank you. The boy beamed, and Ethan felt something twist in his chest. This was dangerous, letting Lucas get close to Clara again, letting himself hope that whatever this was might last longer than a single night. The Thorntons would be looking for her, rich, powerful people who didn't accept defiance. But looking at Clara now, seeing the fear and exhaustion and desperate hope in her eyes, Ethan couldn't bring himself to turn her away. Whatever had happened between them 2 years ago, whatever pain her disappearance had caused, she needed help now. And he'd never been the kind of man who could refuse someone in need. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "Longer if you need to. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." "Ethan, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." He stood, his knees creaking, and, "Lucas, can you show Clara to the spare room, the one with the blue quilt?" "That's your room," Clara said. "Was my room. I moved to the bigger one after—" He stopped. "After you left," he'd been about to say. "After I stopped expecting you to come back." Clara understood anyway. He could see it in her face. Lucas took Clara's hand, gentle and solemn. "Come on, I'll show you. It's the nice room. Papa keeps it clean, even though nobody uses it." Ethan watched them go, Lucas supporting Clara as she limped on her bandaged feet, her torn wedding dress trailing behind her. When they disappeared into the hallway, he sank onto the sofa and put his head in his hands. The smart thing would be to ride into town tomorrow, tell the sheriff he'd found a runaway bride, let the law handle it. The Thorntons would come collect their property, and Clara would go back to whatever life she'd chosen, and Ethan could go back to his careful, controlled existence. But Clara hadn't chosen that life. She'd explicitly run from it, and Ethan had never been particularly good at doing the smart thing when it came to Clara Hale. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He stood, crossing to open it, already knowing who he'd find. James McKenna stood on the porch, his coat buttoned against the cold, his weathered face creased with concern. "Saw you come in looking rushed. Everything all right?" Ethan stepped outside, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. "Found someone on the road. Woman, half frozen." James's eyes sharpened. "Who?" "Clara Hale." The foreman went very still. "Clara? The Clara who—" "Yes. But she left 2 years ago. She and her family—" "I know what happened 2 years ago, James." Ethan kept his voice low. "What I don't know is why she was standing in the middle of the road today wearing a torn wedding dress and bleeding feet." James let out a slow breath. "Wedding dress?" "She ran away from Marcus Thornton." "Jesus." James ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. "The Thorntons aren't going to let that stand." "I know. They'll come here. They'll figure out she came this direction, and this is the first ranch on this road." "I know that too." James studied him in the darkness, his expression unreadable. "You're going to keep her anyway." It wasn't a question. "She needs help." "She needed help 2 years ago, and she didn't come to you then." The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He'd thought the same thing 100 times in the past hour, but hearing someone else say it made it real in a way his own thoughts hadn't. "Maybe she couldn't," he said quietly, "or maybe she didn't want to." "James, I'm not trying to be cruel, Ethan. I'm trying to keep you from getting hurt again. You barely survived it the first time." Ethan looked back at the house, where warm light spilled from the windows into the cold night. Somewhere inside, Clara was probably sleeping, exhausted beyond measure, and Lucas was probably watching over her, the way he watched over the injured animals they sometimes found on the ranch. She said her father forced her into it, to pay his debts. James was quiet for a long moment. "You believe her?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." "And if the Thorntons come?" "Then I'll deal with them. They have money, power, lawyers. And I have my land, my son, and a clear conscience." Ethan met his foreman's eyes. "I'm not giving her up without a fight, James. Not this time." James sighed. "You're a stubborn man, Ethan Cole." "So I've been told." "All right. I'll keep watch tonight. Anyone comes up that road, you'll know about it." "You don't have to—" Yes, I do. Because you're going to do this fool thing whether I help or not, and I'd rather be there to back you up when it all goes to hell." James turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I hope she's telling the truth. I hope she has good reasons for everything, because if she doesn't, This is going to break your heart all over again." Ethan watched his foreman walk back toward the bunkhouse, his silhouette dark against the snow. Then he went back inside, locked the door, and checked on Clara one more time. She was asleep in the spare room, Lucas curled up in the chair beside the bed, despite Ethan's earlier instructions to get ready for his own bed. The boy's eyes were closed, his breathing even. Ethan gathered him carefully, carrying him to his own room without waking him. When Lucas was settled, Ethan returned to the spare room. Clara hadn't moved. In sleep, with her face relaxed and the firelight soft on her features, she looked almost like the woman he remembered. Almost like the Clara who used to laugh at his terrible jokes and challenge him to shooting contests she always won and kiss him like the world might end tomorrow, so they'd better make today count. But she also looked like a stranger, thinner, harder, marked by experiences he knew nothing about. "Why didn't you write?" he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear. "Why didn't you send word, something, anything to let me know you were alive?" She slept on, oblivious to his questions, and Ethan turned away. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions, or the Thorntons. Tonight, all he could do was make sure she was warm and safe and protected. It was more than he'd been able to do 2 years ago. It would have to be enough. Morning came cold and clear, the kind of winter dawn that made the whole world look fragile, like blown glass that might shatter if you breathed too hard. Ethan woke in his chair by the kitchen stove, his neck stiff and his back aching from the awkward position. He'd meant to sleep in his own bed, but every time he'd tried to settle, he'd found himself listening for sounds from the spare room, wondering if Clara was still there or if he'd imagined the whole thing. The house was quiet except for the wind outside and the soft ticking of the clock on the mantel. Pale light filtered through the frost-covered windows, turning everything silver and blue. Ethan stood, working the kinks out of his spine, and moved quietly down the hall. The spare room door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could see Clara still asleep, her dark hair spread across the pillow, one hand curled beneath her cheek. She looked peaceful, younger somehow, and Ethan felt that dangerous warmth spreading through his chest again, the feeling he'd worked so hard to bury. He turned away and went to check on Lucas. His son's room was a chaos of carved wooden animals, books with dog-eared pages, and drawings pinned to the walls. Lucas himself was sprawled across his bed in that boneless way children had, one leg hanging off the edge, his mouth slightly open. Ethan pulled the blanket up and tucked it around him, then headed to the kitchen to start coffee. The routine of it helped. Fill the pot with water from the pump, measure the grounds, set it on the stove to heat. Simple tasks that required no thinking, no decision-making beyond the mechanical. While he waited for the coffee, Ethan looked out the window toward the bunkhouse. James was already up, smoke rising from the chimney in a thin gray line. As Ethan watched, the foreman emerged, checking the perimeter the way he did every morning, his rifle in the crook of his arm. When he saw Ethan in the window, he gave a short nod. "No trouble during the night, then?" The coffee began to perk, filling the kitchen with its bitter, familiar smell. Ethan was pouring his first cup when he heard the soft scuff of footsteps in the hallway. He turned to find Clara in the doorway, wrapped in the quilt from the bed, her bandaged feet pale against the wooden floor. "You shouldn't be walking on those," he said. "I know, but I needed—" She gestured vaguely. "I couldn't just lie there anymore." Ethan pulled out a chair. "Sit. I'll get you coffee." She moved carefully across the kitchen, every step obviously painful, and lowered herself into the chair with a barely suppressed wince. In the morning light, Ethan could see the full extent of her condition. There were bruises on her arms, fading yellow-green ones that spoke of rough handling. Her collarbone stood out sharp beneath her skin, and her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion that went deeper than one sleepless night. He poured coffee into his second-best cup and set it before her, then took the chair across the table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Clara wrapped her hands around the cup, seeking its warmth, and stared into the dark liquid as if it might hold answers. "Thank you," she finally said, "for last night, for not turning me away." "Where else would you go?" "I don't know. Anywhere." "Nowhere." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "I honestly didn't have a plan beyond running. I just knew I couldn't stay in that house another minute." Ethan took a sip of his coffee, using the time to choose his words carefully. "Tell me what happened," Not the running part. Before that, 2 years ago. Clara's hands tightened on her cup. You want to know why I left? I want to know why you vanished without a word. One day you were here, and the next day you were gone. Your whole family was gone. The house empty, the store closed. Like you'd never existed. My father got a letter from a bank in Denver. Claire's voice was flat again, that same recitation of facts she'd used last night. Calling in his loans, all of them. He had 2 weeks to settle his debts, or they'd take everything. The store, our house, every asset we had. What kind of debts? The kind that come from a man who thinks he's smarter than he is, making deals with men who are actually smart. Bitterness crept into her tone. He'd been investing in mining ventures, bad ones, claims that produced nothing but expense. He'd borrowed against the store, against our property. He thought he'd strike it rich. Instead, he struck nothing. Ethan set down his cup. And the Thorntons? Marcus Thornton came to our house 3 days after we got the letter. He was very polite, very understanding. He said he'd heard about our situation and wanted to help. Clara laughed, sharp and humorless. He offered to buy my father's debts, all of them, for pennies on the dollar, of course. My father would lose the store, the house, everything we had. But he wouldn't go to debtor's prison. We wouldn't starve. In exchange for what? For me. She met his eyes. He wanted me as his wife. He'd been watching me, he said. Thought I had good breeding, good manners, would make a suitable Mrs. Thornton once I was properly trained. Ethan's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached, and your father agreed. Not at first. He tried to find other options, but the banks wouldn't help. His business partners had already fled or lost everything themselves, and Marcus kept sweetening the deal. He'd forgive the debts entirely if I married him. My parents could live in one of his properties rent-free. He'd give my father a position managing one of his smaller ventures. Clara's voice dropped, and he made it very clear what would happen if we refused. Prison for my father, my mother and I thrown onto the street with nothing. He was very detailed about it. So you agreed. I was given a choice. The bitterness was back, sharper now. Marry Marcus Thornton and save my family, or refuse and watch them destroyed. What kind of choice is that? Ethan wanted to argue that there were always choices, always options, but he'd lived in this country long enough to know better. The law protected men with money and power. It crushed everyone else. You could have come to me. The words hung between them, heavy with 2 years of hurt. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I tried. What? I tried, Ethan. I wrote you, over and over. The first letter the day after Marcus came. The second a week later. More after that. I begged you to come, to help, to... She stopped, her voice breaking. I kept waiting for you to show up, kept telling myself you'd received my letters, and you'd come charging in like you did when those men tried to steal our horses, like you always did when someone needed help. Ethan's world tilted. I never got any letters. I know that now. Clara, I swear, I believe you. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. Marcus kept us under close watch after the engagement. We were moved to a house on one of his properties. He called it a chance for me to adjust to my new life, to be educated in the ways of wealthy society. But it was a prison. Tutors and etiquette lessons and dress fittings, all supervised. My mother was there, but she was so grateful to Marcus for saving us that she went along with everything, encouraged me to be compliant, to accept my fate. The letters? I gave them to the housekeeper. She promised to mail them. She seemed kind, sympathetic. Clara's laugh was broken. I was so naive. Of course, Marcus had bought her loyalty along with everything else. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. He moved to the window, needing the distance to process what she was telling him. 2 years. 2 years she'd been imprisoned while he'd believed she'd simply chosen to leave. 2 years of letters that never came, of questions that had no answers. Did he hurt you? The question came out rougher than he intended. Not physically, not then. Marcus was very careful about that. He wanted a wife who looked perfect, who would smile at his business associates and host his parties and never cause him embarrassment. A wife who came to him with visible bruises would raise questions. But there were bruises, Ethan said, turning back to face her. I saw them last night. Clara pulled the quilt tighter around herself. That was yesterday, after the wedding. When I said I couldn't, she stopped, breathing hard. Marcus told me I was being hysterical, that all brides were nervous. He grabbed my arms, tried to force me toward the bedroom. I fought him. That's when I knew I had to run. The coffee cup shattered in Ethan's hand. He looked down, surprised to find he'd been gripping it hard enough to break. Blood welled from a cut on his palm, dark red against his skin. Ethan. Clara started to rise. I'm fine. He wrapped his hand in a dish towel, applying pressure. Just careless. But it wasn't carelessness. It was rage, pure and simple, at the image of Marcus Thornton putting his hands on Clara, at 2 years stolen, at letters that never came. He wanted to saddle his horse and ride to the Thornton ranch, and put his fist through Marcus Thornton's face until the man understood exactly what he'd taken. Papa? Lucas stood in the kitchen doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I heard something break. Just a cup, buddy. I dropped it. Lucas's gaze went from Ethan to Clara and back again, his 6-year-old mind clearly working to understand the tension in the room. Miss Clara, are you feeling better? Clara's expression softened immediately. Much better, Lucas. Thank you for being so helpful last night. Papa says you're going to stay with us for a while. Ethan hadn't said that exactly, but looking at Lucas's hopeful face and Clara's exhausted one, he found himself nodding. That's right. Miss Clara needs a safe place to recover. From what? From a difficult journey, Clara answered before Ethan could. Sometimes people need help, and your father is kind enough to provide it. Lucas accepted this with the easy trust of childhood. Are you hungry? Papa makes good pancakes. Not as good as Mrs. Henderson's, but pretty good. Despite everything, Clara smiled. I would love some pancakes. I'll get the flour. Lucas scampered toward the pantry, his earlier sleepiness forgotten. Ethan caught Clara's eye. We're not done talking. I know, but talking would have to wait. Lucas was already pulling ingredients from the pantry with enthusiastic abandon, and the morning routine was calling. Ethan set about making pancakes while Lucas chattered at Clara, telling her about his pony and the barn cats and the coyote he'd seen last week that had the prettiest coat he'd ever seen. Clara listened, really listened, the way she always had with Lucas. She asked questions and made appropriate sounds of amazement and horror at all the right moments, and slowly the tension in the kitchen eased into something almost normal. Almost. They were halfway through breakfast when James knocked at the door. Ethan let him in, noting the tight set of the foreman's shoulders. Morning, James. Coffee? No time. James glanced at Clara, then back to Ethan. Got riders coming up the valley. 4 men. They're still a ways out, but they're coming here. Ethan's hand went instinctively to where his gun belt would hang if he were wearing it. The Thorntons? Can't say for sure at this distance, but it's a fair assumption. Clara had gone pale, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Lucas looked between the adults, sensing the shift in mood even if he didn't understand it. How long? Ethan asked. 20 minutes. Maybe 30, if they stop to water their horses at the creek. Ethan's mind raced through options. He could hide Clara, claim he hadn't seen her. But the wagon tracks from last night would be visible in the snow, leading right to his door. And if Marcus Thornton was with those riders, one look at Ethan's face would tell him everything he needed to know. Or he could stand his ground. Tell them Clara was under his protection and they weren't taking her anywhere. That would likely end with lawyers, or violence. Possibly both. Clara, he said carefully, I need you to tell me right now if there's anything else I should know. Anything that would give them legal grounds to take you back. She set down her fork. We're married. In the eyes of the law, I'm his property. The word property made Ethan's stomach turn. Not in my eyes. The law doesn't care about your eyes. Claire's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Marcus has money, influence, judges in his pocket. I signed papers, made vows. Even if I can prove he hurt me, even if I can show the marriage was coerced, it doesn't matter. I'm his wife. Papa? Lucas's voice was small. Is someone trying to hurt Miss Clara? Ethan looked at his son, at the worry in those young eyes, and made his decision. Yes, buddy, but we're not going to let them. What should I do? I need you to be very brave. Can you do that? Lucas nodded, his jaw set in a way that reminded Ethan painfully of his mother. Go to your room, take your books. Stay there until I come get you. No matter what you hear, you stay there. Understand? Yes, Papa. Ethan watched his son walk down the hall, proud and heartbroken at the same time. Then he turned to James. Get my rifle, and yours. I want them visible, but not threatening. Ethan, I'm not handing her over without a fight. But I'm also not looking to start a war. We'll talk first. If they're reasonable, maybe we can find a solution that doesn't end in bloodshed. James looked skeptical, but nodded and headed for the door. Ethan moved to the window, scanning the horizon. He could see them now, 4 dark shapes against the white landscape, moving steadily toward the ranch. You don't have to do this, Clara said behind him. I can go. Tell them I forced you to help me, that you didn't know who I was. I'm not turning you over to a man who hurts you. He has the law on his side. Then the law is wrong. Clara moved beside him, her bandaged feet silent on the floor. She stood close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body, smell the faint scent of lavender soap she must have used from the wash basin in the spare room. 2 years ago, she said quietly, I thought about running to you. Every day during those 18 months they kept me in that house. I thought about it, but I was so afraid. Of what? That you wouldn't believe me, that you'd think I'd chosen to leave, chosen Marcus and his money over you, that too much time had passed and you'd moved on. She turned to face him. That you wouldn't want me anymore. Ethan looked down at her, at the woman he'd tried so hard to forget, and felt all his carefully constructed walls crumbling. I never stopped wanting you. I just stopped hoping you wanted me back. I wrote every week, sometimes more. I told you everything. About the prison they'd made for me, about the wedding plans, about how much I missed you. Her voice broke. I told you about Lucas, how much I thought about him, wondered how much he'd grown. I poured my heart into those letters. And I never saw them. The waste of it hit him then. The sheer stupid waste of 2 years lost to intercepted letters and assumptions. He'd been so sure Clara had abandoned him that he'd never questioned the silence, never searched for her, never fought for what they'd had. James returned with the rifles, handing one to Ethan. They're close, maybe 5 minutes. All right. Ethan checked the rifle, making sure it was loaded. Clara, I need you in the spare room. Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you. Ethan, please. He met her eyes. I can think more clearly if I know you're safe. She hesitated, then nodded and limped toward the hallway. At the door, she paused. Ethan, thank you for believing me. Then she was gone, and Ethan heard the click of the bedroom door lock. He positioned himself near the window where he could see the approaching riders clearly. James took up position by the door, rifle held casually but ready. The riders came on, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. As they drew closer, Ethan could make out details. 3 of them wore the kind of clothes working men wore, practical coats and worn hats. But the 4th man was dressed differently, in a fine wool coat and a hat that probably cost more than Ethan's horse. Marcus Thornton. Had to be. The riders pulled up in front of the house, their horses stamping and snorting. The well-dressed man dismounted smoothly, and Ethan got his first clear look at Clara's husband. Marcus Thornton was younger than Ethan had expected, maybe 35, with dark hair slicked back and a neat mustache. He was handsome in the way wealthy men often were, well-fed, well-groomed, carrying himself with the confidence that came from never having heard the word no. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, rifle held loosely in his hands. The message was clear. I'm armed, but I'm not pointing it at you. Yet. Mr. Thornton, I presume. Marcus's eyes flicked to the rifle, then to Ethan's face. And you are? Ethan Cole. This is my land. Mr. Cole. Marcus's voice was smooth, educated. I apologize for the early intrusion. I'm looking for my wife. I have reason to believe she may have come this way. Why would you think that? Because she's been gone since yesterday afternoon, and this is the first occupied property along this road. Marcus gestured to the men with him. These are my associates. We've been searching all night. My wife is not well. She suffers from nervous episodes. I'm very concerned for her safety. The lie was delivered so smoothly that Ethan might have believed it if Clara hadn't told him the truth just an hour ago. Marcus made her sound fragile, unbalanced, someone who needed to be protected from herself. "I see," Ethan said. "That must be worrying." "Indeed. So if you've seen her, I would be most grateful. She's about this tall." Marcus held up his hand. Dark hair, hazel eyes. "She may be confused, disoriented." "She might also be barefoot," one of the other men added. Tracks we followed showed bare feet in the snow. Ethan kept his expression neutral. A woman with no shoes in this weather would be in trouble. Precisely. Marcus took a step closer to the porch, which is why I need to find her quickly, before the cold does any permanent damage. James shifted his weight, a subtle warning. Ethan could feel the tension coiling tighter. "Mr. Thornton, I'm curious about something." "Yes?" "If your wife is having nervous episodes, why did she run from you? Wouldn't she seek comfort from her husband?" Marcus's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "As I said, she's not well. Her behavior doesn't always follow logic." "Or maybe," Ethan said carefully, "she had a good reason to run." The smile vanished. "Mr. Cole, I don't appreciate what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, just observing that a woman doesn't usually flee her own wedding without cause." "You admit you've seen her then?" Ethan didn't answer directly. "I'm saying if I had seen a frightened woman with injuries consistent with rough handling, I might have questions about the man claiming to be her loving husband." Marcus's jaw tightened. Behind him, his men shifted, hands moving toward their gun belts. Ethan raised his rifle slightly, not aiming, but making his position clear. Beside him, he heard James do the same. "Careful, Mr. Thornton," Ethan said quietly. "You're on my land with armed men. Some might call that trespassing. And harboring another man's wife is called theft. Only if she's property. I was under the impression we fought a war over whether people could be owned." Marcus's face flushed. "Clara is my legal wife. She belongs with me." "Does she? Because from what I understand, she spent most of your marriage climbing out a window to get away from you." One of Marcus's men moved his hand to his gun. Instantly, both Ethan and James raised their rifles, not quite aiming, but close. "I wouldn't," James said mildly. "Mr. Cole's a better shot than me, and I once hit a running elk at 200 yards. The man's hand moved away from his weapon. Marcus held up a placating hand. "Gentlemen, there's no need for violence. Mr. Cole, I understand you may have been deceived by my wife's stories. She's very convincing when she's in the grip of her delusions, but I assure you I only want what's best for her. She needs proper care, medical attention. She needs to be away from you." The words came from behind Ethan. He turned to find Clara standing in the doorway, wrapped in the quilt, her bandaged feet planted firmly despite the pain they must be causing. Her face was pale but set, her eyes locked on Marcus. "Clara." Marcus's voice changed, became softer, more concerned. "My dear, you've had us all so worried. Please come down from there. Let's get you warm and safe." "I am safe. Here." Clara's hands tightened on the quilt. "I'm not going back with you, Marcus." "Darling, you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly. For the first time in 2 years." She took a step forward, wincing but not stopping. "You forced me into a marriage I didn't want. You kept me prisoner. You tried to—" Her voice wavered, then strengthened. "I know what you tried to do, and I'm never giving you that chance again." Marcus's mask of concern slipped further. "You're my wife. You made vows before witnesses. Vows you forced me to make under threat to my family. Your father agreed. My father had no choice. You engineered that situation. You bought his debt specifically to trap me. That's a serious accusation." Marcus's voice had gone cold. "One you can't prove." "Can't I?" Clara's chin lifted. "I wonder what a court would think about your business practices, about how many other families you've manipulated this way." For the first time, Marcus looked uncertain. "Clara, be reasonable." "No." The word rang out clear and firm. "I'm done being reasonable, done being obedient, done pretending this marriage was anything but a transaction where I was the commodity." Ethan felt pride surge through him. This was the Clara he remembered, the one who stood up to bullies and fought for what was right. Marcus's expression hardened. You can't stay here. I'll get the law involved. I'll have this man arrested for harboring you. Try it, Ethan said. I'll tell them about the bruises on her arms, about her bleeding feet from running through snow, about how terrified she is of her own husband. Her word against mine. Mine too, James added. I saw her condition when she arrived. Marcus looked between them, calculating. Then his gaze settled on Clara, and something cruel entered his expression. I could make things very difficult for your family, Clara. Your father's position, your mother's housing, all of that depends on my goodwill. Clara flinched, but held her ground. Then do it. I won't trade my freedom for their comfort anymore. They'll hate you for it. Maybe. But at least I'll hate myself a little less. The words hung in the cold morning air. Marcus stared at Clara, perhaps seeing for the first time that she truly meant to defy him, that all his money and power and carefully constructed threats weren't enough to force her back under his control. This isn't over, he finally said. I have lawyers, Clara, resources you can't imagine. I'll pursue this through every legal channel available. You do that? Clara's voice was steady, despite the tears Ethan could see gathering in her eyes. But I'm not leaving this ranch. Not willingly. Marcus mounted his horse in one smooth motion, his movements tight with barely controlled anger. You'll regret this, both of you. I've got a lot of regrets, Ethan said, but protecting someone who needs it won't be one of them. Marcus jerked his horse's head around and spurred toward the road, his men following. Ethan and James kept their rifles ready until the riders were well away, becoming small, dark shapes against the snow once more. Only when they disappeared completely did Ethan lower his weapon. He turned to find Clara swaying on her feet, all the strength that had kept her upright suddenly gone. He caught her before she fell, feeling her body shaking against his. I've got you, he murmured. You're safe now. Am I? Her voice was muffled against his chest. Ethan, he meant what he said. He'll use the law, use his money, use anything he can to force me back. Let him try. You don't understand what he's capable of, and he doesn't understand what I'm capable of. Ethan pulled back enough to look into her face. I failed you 2 years ago. I didn't fight for you, didn't search for you, just accepted that you were gone. I'm not making that mistake again. Clara's tears spilled over. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. You made it my fight the moment you trusted me enough to tell me the truth. James cleared his throat from his position by the door, and Ethan realized he was still holding Clara, her face pressed against his shirt, her tears soaking through the fabric. He didn't let go. I'll keep watch, James said quietly, in case they decide to come back. Thank you. Ethan's voice was rough. The foreman nodded and stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him with a soft click. Through the window, Ethan could see him taking up position on the porch, rifle across his lap, his weathered face scanning the horizon. Clara pulled back slightly, wiping at her eyes with the corner of the quilt. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come out. I should have stayed hidden like you asked. You did exactly what you needed to do. Ethan guided her toward the kitchen table, helping her sit before her legs gave out completely. You stood up to him. That took courage. It took stupidity. Now he knows where I am. Now he'll come back with the law, with papers, with whatever he needs to force me back. Her hands trembled as she wrapped them around herself. I've made everything worse. You've made everything honest. Ethan poured her coffee, adding sugar the way he remembered she liked it. No more hiding, no more pretending. He knows you're here, and he knows you're choosing to stay. That's a kind of power he can't take away. Clara accepted the cup but didn't drink. You don't know Marcus. He doesn't accept defeat, ever. It's not in his nature. Then he's never met someone who won't back down. Ethan sat across from her. I mean what I said, Clara. I'm not handing you over to him. Even if it costs you everything? Your ranch, your freedom, your safety? She looked up, her hazel eyes red-rimmed but fierce. Even if it puts Lucas in danger? The mention of his son made Ethan's chest tighten. He'd been so focused on protecting Clara that he hadn't fully considered what Marcus might do to retaliate. A man with that much money and influence could make life very difficult for anyone who crossed him. But the alternative was sending Clara back to a man who'd hurt her, who'd kept her prisoner, who'd forced her into a marriage she didn't want. And Ethan couldn't do that. Wouldn't do that. not even to protect himself. Lucas is learning what it means to stand up for people who need help, he said finally. That's not a bad lesson. It is if it gets him hurt. Marcus won't hurt a child. He's cruel, but he's not stupid. Harming Lucas would turn public opinion against him faster than anything else. Clara didn't look convinced, but she nodded. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the wind outside. Then Clara set down her cup and looked at Ethan directly. I need to tell you about the letters. All of them. Clara, please. You need to understand what happened. Why I thought... She stopped, swallowing hard. Why I thought you'd abandoned me. Ethan settled back in his chair, preparing himself. All right. The first letter I wrote the night Marcus came to our house with his offer. I was terrified, desperate. I told you everything about my father's debts, about Marcus's proposal, about how I had 1 week before I had to give my answer. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. I begged you to come, told you I'd rather run away with nothing than marry a man I didn't love. Each word was a knife in Ethan's chest. He'd been here, on this ranch, going about his normal life, while Clara had been writing desperate pleas for help that he'd never received. I gave it to Mrs. Chen at the post office myself, watched her stamp it, paid for the fastest delivery. Clara's voice remained steady, but her hands shook. Then I waited. 3 days, 4, nothing. I told myself you were busy with the ranch, that you'd come as soon as you got the letter, but you didn't come. I didn't know, Ethan said quietly. I wrote again. This time I was more explicit. I told you I loved you, that I'd always loved you, that the thought of marrying Marcus made me physically ill. I said I'd wait by the creek where we used to meet every afternoon at 3, hoping you'd come. She paused. I waited there for a week, in the rain, in the cold. You never came. Ethan's hands clenched into fists on the table. Somewhere, someone had those letters, had read them and destroyed them and let Clara wait alone by that creek, hoping for rescue that never arrived. After that, we were moved to Marcus's property. He said it was to prepare me for married life, but I knew it was to isolate me, to make sure I couldn't run. Clara's voice dropped. There was a housekeeper there, Mrs. Patterson. She seemed kind, sympathetic. She'd slip me extra food at dinner, ask if I needed anything. I thought she was an ally. She wasn't. No, but I didn't realize that until much later. Clara wrapped the quilt tighter. I kept writing. Every week, sometimes twice a week. I'd give the letters to Mrs. Patterson, and she'd promise to mail them. She'd even bring me fake replies sometimes. Short notes she'd forged in your handwriting saying you were busy, or that you needed time to think, or that you weren't sure we were right for each other. The cruelty of it stole Ethan's breath. To not only intercept Clara's letters, but to actively deceive her, to make her believe he was receiving them and choosing not to help. It was systematic, calculated torture. How did you know they were fake? I didn't. Not at first. Clara's laugh was bitter. I believed them. I thought you'd gotten my letters and decided I wasn't worth the trouble. That maybe what we'd had wasn't as real as I'd thought. That I'd been foolish to believe a rancher and the daughter of a shopkeeper could build a life together. Clara, let me finish, please. She took a shaky breath. The wedding was set for 18 months after the engagement. Marcus said that was proper, that it would give me time to be educated in the ways of society. What he meant was it would give him time to break me down, to make me compliant. Did it work? Almost. The admission clearly cost her. By the time the wedding came, I was so tired, Ethan. Tired of fighting, tired of hoping, tired of waiting for rescue that never came. Part of me thought maybe everyone was right, that I should just accept my fate, marry Marcus, try to make the best of it. At least my family would be safe. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold despite the warm kitchen. But you didn't accept it. No, because 3 days before the wedding, I found the letters. Ethan went still. What? Mrs. Patterson got careless, or maybe she was getting older and forgot. I don't know, but I went into her room looking for a sewing kit and I found a box under her bed. Clara's eyes were distant, seeing something Ethan couldn't. It was full of letters, all my letters to you, dozens of them, every single one I'd given her to mail, unopened, unread, never sent. Sweet Jesus, Ethan breathed. The fake replies were there too. She'd practiced your handwriting on scraps of paper, getting it right before she wrote the actual letters. She'd even stolen one of your real letters to me from before, using it as a template. Clara's voice hardened. I confronted her, asked her why. She said Marcus had paid her, generously, that it was just business, nothing personal. Nothing personal. Ethan's rage was a living thing in his chest. She stole 2 years of your life and called it business. I took the letters, all of them, hid them in my room and tried to figure out what to do. I thought about running then, but Marcus had guards everywhere, and I knew if I tried and failed, he'd make sure I never got another chance. She squeezed Ethan's hand. So I waited, went through with the wedding, smiled and said my vows, and pretended to be the perfect bride while I planned my escape. The image of Clara standing at an altar, speaking words she didn't mean while clutching stolen letters in her mind, made Ethan's throat tight. The reception went on for hours, dancing and champagne and speeches about our bright future together. Marcus kept his hand on my waist the entire time, possessive, marking his territory. Clara's face paled. When it finally ended, when we went to the house he'd prepared for us, I knew I was out of time. It was run then, or never run at all. So you climbed out a window. Second floor, there was a trellis covered in roses. I tore my dress getting down, cut my hands on the thorns. But I made it. She looked down at her bandaged feet. I didn't have shoes, didn't have time to find any. I just ran. Where were you trying to go? Here. To you. It was the only place I could think of where I might be safe. Clara's voice broke. I thought if I could just reach you, if I could explain what happened, show you the letters, you'd understand why I disappeared, that maybe you'd help me. Of course I'd help you, Ethan said fiercely. If I'd known, if I'd had any idea what was happening, but you didn't know because someone made sure you didn't. Clara pulled her hand away and stood, moving to the window despite her injured feet. The question is who? Who would intercept my letters before they even reached the post office? Ethan's mind raced through possibilities. Mrs. Chen at the post office was 60 years old and had known him since he was a boy. She had no reason to betray him. The mail carrier changed routes frequently, and Ethan couldn't imagine any of them caring enough about his personal life to interfere, which left only one real possibility. Someone who had access to the ranch's mail, who would have been at the house when letters arrived, who might have had reasons of his own for wanting Clara gone. James, Ethan said slowly. Clara turned from the window. Your foreman? He handles the mail when I'm not here, takes it into town, picks it up. Ethan's stomach churned. But James wouldn't. He's been with me for 5 years. He's loyal. Is he loyal to you or to the idea of you staying exactly as you are? Clara asked quietly. You said yourself he barely survived helping you through my disappearance. Maybe he didn't want to go through that again. Ethan stood, his chair scraping loudly. I need to talk to him. Ethan, wait. But he was already moving toward the door, his anger needing an outlet, needing answers. He yanked open the door and stepped onto the porch where James sat keeping watch. The older man looked up, his expression questioning. Everything all right? Did you intercept Clara's letters? James's face went carefully blank. What? 2 years ago, when Clara disappeared. Did you intercept letters she sent to me? For a long moment, James said nothing. Then he set his rifle aside and stood slowly, his movements those of a man preparing for a fight. Yes. The admission hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd expected denials, explanations, anything but this casual confirmation of betrayal. Why? The word came out strangled. James looked past him, toward where Clara stood in the doorway. Because she left you once before, and it nearly destroyed you. Because you were just starting to heal, to function again. Because I couldn't watch you go through that again. That wasn't your decision to make. Wasn't it? You were in no state to make decisions. You barely ate, barely slept. Lucas was terrified because his father had become a ghost. James's voice rose. Then Clara's letters started coming, full of desperation and excuses. And I knew if you read them, you'd go charging off to rescue her. You'd get yourself killed or ruined or both, and Lucas would lose another parent. Ethan's fists clenched. Those letters were mine. Clara was mine to save or not save. She wasn't yours anymore. She'd left, made her choice. She was being held prisoner, forced into a marriage she didn't want. So she said in her letters. James's expression was hard. But how was I supposed to know if that was true? For all I knew, she'd changed her mind about the wealthy man and was trying to keep you as a backup plan. You know Clara. You know she wouldn't. I knew a Clara from 2 years ago. People change, especially when money and status are involved. James picked up his rifle again, not threatening but not backing down either. I made a choice to protect you and Lucas. If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, so be it. But I'd make the same choice again. Ethan stared at the man he'd trusted with his land, his livestock, his son. The man who'd been his friend and advisor and steady presence through every crisis, and felt that trust crumbling into dust. Get off my land. James went very still. Ethan, you're fired. I want you gone by sunset. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. Ethan's voice was cold, controlled. You destroyed 2 years of our lives because you thought you knew better than we did. You played judge and jury with information that wasn't yours. You lied to me every day for 2 years by omission. I protected you. You controlled me. There's a difference. Ethan stepped closer. I trusted you, James, with everything, and you used that trust to manipulate me. James's jaw worked. And what about her? You're going to trust her again just like that? After she married another man? She was forced. Was she? Or is that just what she's telling you now, that her rich husband turned out to be less appealing than she thought? Ethan's fist connected with James's jaw before he'd fully decided to throw the punch. The older man staggered back, catching himself on the porch railing. Blood trickled from his split lip. Don't, Ethan said quietly, dangerously. Don't you dare question her integrity when you've spent 2 years proving you have none. James wiped the blood from his mouth, his eyes hard. You're making a mistake. Not the first time. Won't be the last. But at least this time it's my mistake to make, not one you've chosen for me. For a moment, Ethan thought James might fight back. The older man's hands clenched, his body tensed. Then he exhaled slowly and straightened. Fine. I'll be gone by sunset. He started down the porch steps, then paused. For what it's worth, I really did think I was doing the right thing. That's the problem with people who think they know best, Ethan said. They never stop to ask if they might be wrong. James walked toward the bunkhouse, his shoulders stiff. Ethan watched him go, his hand aching from the punch, his chest aching from something deeper. Ethan, Clara's voice was soft behind him. I'm sorry. He turned to find her in the doorway, wrapped in her quilt, her face pale. You have nothing to be sorry for. I cost you your foreman, your friend. He cost himself that when he decided to play fate. Ethan moved past her into the house, suddenly exhausted. How many letters were there? 47. I counted. 47 letters over 2 years, nearly one every other week, all destroyed or hidden because James McKenna had decided he knew what was best. I want to read them, Ethan said. Clara's eyes widened. They're gone. I had to leave them behind when I ran. They're probably in Marcus's hands now. The thought of Marcus Thornton reading Clara's private pleas for help made Ethan's stomach turn. But there was nothing to be done about it now. Tell me what they said. As much as you remember. Clara moved to the sofa and sat carefully. The first ones were desperate, begging you to come, to help, to save me from the marriage. I told you about my father's debts, about Marcus's proposal, about how trapped I felt. Ethan sat beside her, close, but not touching. What else? I told you about my days, the tutors Marcus hired, the etiquette lessons, the endless fittings for dresses I didn't want. I told you about my mother, how she'd changed, how she kept telling me to be grateful, to accept my fate. Clara's voice softened. I told you about my memories of us. The time we went swimming in the creek and you fell off the rock. The Sunday you taught Lucas to skip stones. The night we sat on your porch watching the stars, and you told me about Sarah, about how much you'd loved her, and how scared you were to love again. Ethan remembered that night, remembered the way Clara had listened without judgment, without jealousy, just with understanding. Remembered how she'd taken his hand and said, love isn't something to be scared of, even when it hurts. I told you I understood if you couldn't help me, Clara continued, if the timing was wrong or the risk too great. But I asked you to at least write back, to let me know you'd received my letters, that you knew what was happening. She looked at him. When the fake letters started coming, saying you needed time or weren't sure about us, I thought my heart would break. But at least I thought you knew. At least I thought you'd made a choice, even if it was to choose yourself over me. I never made that choice. I never got the chance. I know that now. But for 2 years, I thought you had. I thought the man who'd held me so gently, who'd promised we'd figure things out together, had decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Tears slipped down her cheeks. That was almost worse than the marriage itself, knowing that you knew I needed you and chose not to come. Ethan pulled her against him, feeling her shake with quiet sobs. I'm so sorry. If I'd known, if there'd been any way for me to know, I believe you. That's why I kept walking yesterday, even when I couldn't feel my feet anymore, even when every step was agony. Because I knew if I could just reach you, if I could just explain, you'd understand. She pulled back to look at him. You're the only person in the world I trust completely, Ethan. Even after everything, even thinking you'd abandon me, some part of me knew that if we could just talk, if the truth could come out, you'd believe me. I do believe you. Ethan wiped tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. Every word. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of 2 lost years pressing down on them. Outside, Ethan could see James loading his belongings onto his horse, his movements efficient and emotionless. Soon the foreman would ride away, and Ethan would be alone with Clara and Lucas, facing whatever Marcus Thornton decided to throw at them. What happens now? Clara asked quietly. Now we figure out how to protect you. Legally, if possible. Other ways, if necessary. Marcus has lawyers, Ethan. The best money can buy. They'll argue I'm his legal wife, that I belong with him, that any choice I make is invalid because of my supposed nervous condition. Then we'll find better lawyers. With what money? I don't have anything. You're a rancher, not a railroad baron. Clara's voice was bleak. This is a fight we can't win. Maybe not in court. Ethan stood and moved to his desk in the corner, pulling out a piece of paper and a pen. But there are other ways to fight. What are you doing? Writing to everyone I know, other ranchers, business owners, the newspaper editor in Denver. I'm going to tell them what Marcus Thornton did, how he forced you into marriage, how he kept you prisoner, how he hurt you when you refused him. Ethan looked up. Rich men like Marcus depend on their reputations. They can buy a lot of things, but they can't buy back respect once it's gone. Clara's eyes widened. He'll sue you for slander. Let him try. I've got your testimony, your injuries, your escape. That's not slander, that's truth. Ethan began writing, his hand moving quickly across the page. And I'm betting other women will come forward once they know it's safe. Men like Marcus don't usually stop at one victim. You're risking everything for me. I'm risking everything for what's right. He glanced at her. There's a difference. Clara stood and moved beside him, reading over his shoulder. You write well for a rancher. My mother was a teacher. She made sure I knew my letters before she'd let me near the horses. The memory brought a sad smile. She'd be proud of this, I think, using words as weapons. She'd be proud of you for standing up for someone who needed help. She'd be furious I let 2 years go by without knowing you needed it. That wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I should have searched for you, should have questioned why you'd vanish without a word, should have known something was wrong. Ethan set down the pen, but I was hurt and angry, and it was easier to believe you'd chosen to leave than to believe something had happened to you. Clara put her hand on his shoulder. We both made assumptions. Both believed the worst instead of fighting for the truth. James made sure we'd believe the worst. Yes, but we let him. We let hurt and pride keep us from asking the right questions. She squeezed his shoulder gently. We can't change the past, Ethan. We can only decide what to do with what's left. He covered her hand with his. I want you to stay, here, at the ranch, for as long as you need or want. Marcus will make that difficult. Let him try. He'll come with the law next time, with papers and judges and threats. And I'll face them. We'll face them together. Ethan turned to look up at her. I failed you once, Clara. I won't do it again. She bent and kissed his forehead, gentle and brief. You didn't fail me. Life failed us both, but maybe we get a second chance now. Before Ethan could respond, Lucas appeared in the doorway, his young face serious. Papa? Mr. James is leaving. He said to tell you goodbye. Ethan felt the words like stones in his chest. Despite everything, James had been a constant presence for 5 years. Losing him felt like losing an anchor. Did he say anything else? He said he's sorry, and that he hopes you're right about Miss Clara. Lucas tilted his head. Papa, why is Mr. James leaving? Because he made some choices I can't forgive, buddy. Did he do something bad? Ethan considered how to explain betrayal to a 6-year-old. He thought he was protecting us, but he hurt us instead. Sometimes people do the wrong thing for what they think are the right reasons. Lucas absorbed this with the gravity of childhood. Is Miss Clara staying? If she wants to. The boy looked at Clara. Do you want to? Very much, Clara said softly. If that's all right with you. It's good. I like having someone to talk to besides Papa and the horses. Lucas moved to the window, watching James ride away down the valley. The horses are good listeners, but they don't tell stories. Despite everything, Clara laughed. No, I suppose they don't. They stood together at the window, the three of them, watching James McKenna disappear into the distance. Ethan felt the weight of what he'd done settling over him like a heavy coat. Without a foreman, running the ranch would be harder. Finding someone else he could trust would take time he didn't have. But Clara was here, alive and safe, and that mattered more than anything else. As if sensing his thoughts, she leaned against him slightly, her warmth seeping through his shirt. We'll figure it out, she said quietly. All of it. Together. Ethan wrapped his arm around her shoulders, careful of her bruises, and pulled her close. Lucas pressed against his other side, and for a moment they were a unit, a family facing an uncertain future together. Outside, the wind picked up, sending snow swirling across the valley. Winter was far from over, and Marcus Thornton would return with whatever weapons he could bring to bear. But standing there with Clara and Lucas, feeling their trust and need, Ethan found he wasn't afraid. He'd spent 2 years believing he'd lost Clara forever. Now she was here, real and solid, and choosing to stay despite the danger. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that, Ethan thought, was worth any risk. The letters went out the next morning with a rider Ethan hired from town, a young man named Tommy who asked no questions and took the generous payment without comment. Ethan watched him disappear down the valley road, carrying words that could either save Clara or destroy what little security Ethan had left. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Clara's feet began to heal, the worst cuts closing over, though she still moved gingerly across the wooden floors. She took over some of the household tasks despite Ethan's protests, insisting that staying busy kept her mind from dwelling on what Marcus might be planning. Lucas followed her everywhere, chattering about the ranch and his pony and asking endless questions about where she'd been and why she'd left. Clara answered with careful honesty, telling him about her father's troubles and her time away, leaving out the darker details. Lucas seemed satisfied with her explanations, his child's mind accepting that adults sometimes had complicated reasons for complicated actions. Ethan spent his days working the ranch alone, doing the jobs that had been James's along with his own. The work was exhausting, starting before dawn and lasting until well after dark. His hands blistered, his back ached, and every night he fell into bed too tired to do anything but sleep. But the physical labor helped channel the anxiety that gnawed at him every time he thought about Marcus Thornton and what legal machinery might already be turning against them. 4 days after the confrontation, the first response arrived. It came from Daniel Morrison, a rancher Ethan had known for years, a man who valued honesty and despised bullies. The letter was short and to the point, saying that Daniel believed Ethan's account and would spread the word among other ranchers in the territory. He also mentioned that his wife had heard troubling rumors about Marcus Thornton's treatment of household staff. Though nothing that could be proven in court, it was something. Not much, but something. The second response came 2 days later from Martha Chen, who ran the Chinese restaurant in town. Her letter was longer, written in careful English, explaining that her niece had once worked in the Thornton household and had left abruptly after what she called an incident. The girl had been too frightened to speak about it then, but Martha thought she might be willing to talk now if it would help Clara. Ethan showed the letter to Clara over breakfast while Lucas fed scraps to the barn cat he'd smuggled into the kitchen. "This girl," Clara said, reading the letter again. "What if Marcus threatens her? What if he goes after her family? Martha's smart. She wouldn't have written if she thought her niece would be in danger." Ethan poured more coffee. "And the more people who speak up, the harder it becomes for Marcus to silence them all. Or the more desperate he becomes." Clara set the letter down. Desperate men do dangerous things. She wasn't wrong. Ethan had been checking the horizon constantly, expecting to see riders or a sheriff's wagon or some other sign that Marcus was making his move. The waiting was its own kind of torture, not knowing when or how the attack would come. Lucas looked up from the cat, his face serious. "Papa, why are you and Miss Clara always watching the road?" Ethan exchanged a glance with Clara. They tried to shield Lucas from the worst of their worry, but children noticed everything. "We're just being careful, buddy, making sure we're ready if we have visitors." "Bad visitors?" "Potentially complicated visitors," Clara said gently. "Sometimes adults have disagreements that take time to resolve." Lucas considered this while scratching behind the cat's ears. "Is it about the man who came before? The one who made you sad?" Clara's breath caught. "Yes, it's about him." "I didn't like him. He had mean eyes." Out of the mouths of children, Ethan thought. Lucas had seen in minutes what it had taken Clara years to understand, that Marcus Thornton's polished exterior hid something cold and cruel. "You have good instincts," Ethan told his son. "Always trust them." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats outside. Ethan was on his feet instantly, his hand going to the rifle he now kept propped by the door. Clara gathered Lucas close, her face pale. But when Ethan looked out the window, he saw not Marcus's men, but a single rider, a woman on a gray mare, moving slowly up the drive. She wore a dark traveling dress and a wide-brimmed hat, and something about the set of her shoulders was familiar. "It's Mrs. Henderson," Ethan said, surprised. "From town." The older woman dismounted with practiced ease and tied her horse to the porch rail. Ethan opened the door before she could knock. "Mrs. Henderson, this is unexpected." "I'm sure it is." Her sharp eyes took in the rifle in his hand, then moved past him to where Clara stood with Lucas. "Miss Hale, or should I say Mrs. Thornton?" Clara's spine straightened. "I prefer Miss Hale." "I imagine you do." Mrs. Henderson stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, bringing with her the smell of lavender and wood smoke. "I won't waste your time with pleasantries. I'm here because I received a most interesting letter from you, Mr. Cole, detailing some serious accusations against Marcus Thornton." Ethan closed the door. "You did. And I came to determine if those accusations have merit or if you're simply a jealous man trying to destroy a business rival. I have no business with Marcus Thornton. This isn't about rivalry." "Then what is it about?" Mrs. Henderson's gaze fixed on Clara. "You've known this girl since she was a child, Mr. Cole. She left 2 years ago without a word, broke your heart if the gossip was true, and now she reappears wearing a wedding dress and claiming abuse. Forgive an old woman's skepticism." Clara stepped forward, her chin lifted despite the tremor in her voice. "You're right to be skeptical, Mrs. Henderson. I would be too in your position, but everything in Ethan's letter is true." "Prove it." The blunt demand hung in the air. Clara glanced at Ethan, then slowly unwrapped the shawl from around her arms. The bruises had faded from their original dark purple to yellowish green, but they were still visible, clear finger marks on her upper arms. "Marcus Thornton left these when I refused him on our wedding night. I also have cuts and bruises on my feet from running barefoot through the snow for hours." Clara's voice remained steady. "But the worst damage isn't visible. It's 2 years of my life stolen, my will broken down piece by piece, my letters to the man I loved intercepted and destroyed so I would believe I'd been abandoned." Mrs. Henderson moved closer, examining the bruises with a practiced eye. "These could be from anything. A fall, a riding accident." "They could be," Clara agreed. "But they're not. And I think you know that, or you wouldn't have ridden all the way out here to see for yourself." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "I heard things about the Thornton household, Whispers from women who worked there and left abruptly. Nothing concrete, nothing anyone would testify to, but enough to make me wonder. She turned to Ethan. You're taking a great risk, Mr. Cole. Marcus Thornton has resources you can't imagine. I know. And you're willing to risk your ranch, your reputation, possibly your freedom for her? Without hesitation. Mrs. Henderson studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if he'd passed some test. Then you're either a fool or a man of genuine character. I'm inclined to believe the latter. She moved to the table and sat without being asked. Tell me everything. From the beginning, and don't leave anything out. For the next hour, Clara talked. She told Mrs. Henderson about her father's debts, about Marcus's proposal, about the 18 months of isolation and manipulation. She talked about the letters she'd written, about Mrs. Patterson's betrayal, about finding those letters unopened under the housekeeper's bed. She described the wedding, the attempted assault, the desperate flight through the snow. Ethan added what he knew about James's interception of the letters, about how he'd found Clara standing in the road like a ghost, about Marcus's arrival with his men and his threats. Lucas sat quietly through it all, playing with his toy horses, but clearly listening. When Clara faltered over describing Marcus's violence, the boy looked up with eyes too old for his face and said, He hurt you and you ran away. That was brave. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Lucas. Mrs. Henderson had taken out a small notebook and was writing in it with quick, efficient strokes. This Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper who intercepted your letters, is she still in Marcus's employ? I don't know. I assume so. And these letters you found, where are they now? I had to leave them when I fled. Marcus likely has them by now. Mrs. Henderson tapped her pencil against the notebook. That's unfortunate. Physical evidence would strengthen your case considerably. What case? Ethan asked. Clara's married to him legally. What case could she possibly make? Annulment on the grounds of coercion. If we can prove Marcus forced her into the marriage through threats against her family, a judge might dissolve it. Mrs. Henderson held up a hand before Clara could protest. I know what you're thinking. Marcus has money and influence, but he doesn't have everything. There are still judges who care more about justice than bribes. Do you know such judges? Clara's voice was small, hopeful. I know one. Judge William Crawford in Denver. He's 73 years old, independently wealthy, and has built his reputation on being incorruptible. Mrs. Henderson closed her notebook. He also happens to be my cousin. The hope that flared in Ethan's chest was almost painful. Would he hear Clara's case? If I ask him to, yes. But Clara would need to testify, publicly, in detail. She'd have to describe everything Marcus did, everything she endured. It would be humiliating and painful, and Marcus's lawyers would try to destroy her credibility at every turn. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened her shoulders. I'll do it. Whatever it takes. It won't be easy, child. They'll paint you as a hysteric, a gold digger who changed her mind when the reality of marriage didn't match her fantasies. They'll bring up every mistake you've ever made, every questionable decision. They'll try to make you look unstable. Let them try. Clara's voice was firm. I know the truth. Ethan knows the truth. That has to count for something. Mrs. Henderson smiled, thin but genuine. It counts for everything, but we'll need more than truth. We'll need evidence, witnesses, documentation. She stood, gathering her things. I'll write to Judge Crawford today. In the meantime, you need to find everyone who might testify on your behalf. Former Thornton employees, anyone who witnessed Marcus's controlling behavior, anyone who can corroborate your story. Martha Chen mentioned her niece, Ethan said. A girl who worked in the Thornton household. Perfect. Get her statement. Get as many as you can. Mrs. Henderson moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Marcus will likely try to have Clara declared mentally incompetent before this gets to court. He'll bring doctors who'll testify to her nervous condition, her hysteria, her inability to make rational decisions. That's not true, Clara protested. Of course it's not, but it's a common tactic. The solution is to have her examined by independent doctors who'll testify to her sound mind. I know several in Denver who would do it for a reasonable fee. Ethan's stomach sank. How reasonable. Mrs. Henderson named a figure that made him wince. It wasn't impossible, but it would mean selling off stock, possibly mortgaging part of the ranch. Everything he'd built would be at risk. "I'll find the money," he said. "Ethan, no." Clara grabbed his arm. "You can't bankrupt yourself for this. Watch me." "I mean it. If this goes badly, if we lose, you'll have nothing left. Lucas will have nothing left. If we don't fight, you'll have nothing left. You'll be back with a man who hurts you, who treats you like property." Ethan covered her hand with his. "That's not acceptable." Mrs. Henderson watched this exchange with interest. "You two have feelings for each other. That's obvious. But the court won't care about feelings. They'll care about law, about propriety, about protecting the institution of marriage." She fixed Clara with a stern look. "Are you prepared for them to ask about your relationship with Mr. Cole? Because they will. They'll imply impropriety, adultery, conspiracy." "There was no adultery," Clara said firmly. "I was held against my will for 2 years. I never chose Marcus, never wanted him. Any relationship I have with Ethan began before my forced marriage and has remained entirely proper since." "Good. Remember that phrasing. Use those exact words if you're asked." Mrs. Henderson opened the door, letting in a gust of cold air. "I'll be in touch within the week. Until then, stay alert. Marcus won't wait patiently while we build a case against him." She rode away, her gray mare picking its way carefully down the snowy path. Ethan watched until she disappeared, then turned to find Clara slumped in a chair, her face in her hands. "Hey." He knelt beside her. "We have a chance now. A real chance. A chance that depends on you spending money you don't have, on witnesses who might be too frightened to testify, on a judge who might decide the law is more important than justice." Clara looked up, her eyes red. "And all of it puts you and Lucas at risk." "Lucas and I will be fine." "You don't know that. Marcus could destroy you out of spite even if we win. He could ruin your reputation, drive away your buyers, make it impossible for you to do business in this territory. Then we'll go somewhere else, start over." "With what? If you mortgage the ranch and we lose, you'll have nothing to start over with." Ethan sat back on his heels, frustrated because she was right. They were betting everything on a legal system that had never been designed to protect women like Clara, on judges who might care more about social order than individual suffering, on witnesses who might disappear rather than face Marcus Thornton's wrath. But the alternative was worse. "I can't send you back to him," Ethan said quietly. "I won't. So whatever it costs, whatever it takes, we fight." Clara slid from the chair onto the floor beside him, wrapping her arms around his neck. She smelled like soap and coffee and something uniquely her, a scent that brought back memories of better times, simpler times, when the future had seemed full of possibility instead of threat. "I don't deserve you," she whispered against his shoulder. "Yes, you do. You deserve someone who'll fight for you, who'll believe you, who'll stand beside you even when everything's falling apart." He pulled back to look at her. "That's what love is, Clara. Not the easy parts, the hard parts. The parts where you have to choose each other over and over again despite the cost." "I love you." The words came out rough, like they'd been locked away for too long. "I never stopped. Even when I thought you'd abandoned me, even when I was standing at that altar marrying another man, I loved you." "I love you too. Always have." They stayed there on the kitchen floor holding each other while Lucas played nearby and the afternoon light slanted through the windows. It wasn't a perfect moment, wasn't romantic or grand, but it was real. And after 2 years of lies and manipulation and stolen chances, real was enough. The week passed slowly. Ethan wrote to everyone he could think of who might help, calling in favors, asking for witnesses, building a case piece by piece. Martha Chen brought her niece, a quiet girl named May, who told a story of late-night screams from Marcus's private rooms, of bruises on his first wife before she died in what was ruled an unfortunate accident, of a household staff that lived in constant fear. Other letters arrived. A former business partner of Marcus's who'd been ruined when he tried to back out of a deal. A lawyer who'd worked for the Thorntons briefly and quit, rather than participate in what he called legal but unethical practices. A woman who'd been engaged to Marcus years ago and had broken it off, refusing to say why, but willing to testify that his character was questionable. Each piece added to their case, but Ethan knew it might not be enough. Marcus had decades of respectable reputation, witnesses of his own, lawyers skilled at twisting truth into fiction. The odds were not in their favor. On the 8th day, a wagon rolled up the drive. Ethan grabbed his rifle instinctively, but relaxed when he saw Mrs. Henderson at the reins with another woman beside her, younger, dressed in severe black. "Mr. Cole," Mrs. Henderson called as she pulled the wagon to a stop. "This is Dr. Sarah Brennan from Denver. She's here to evaluate Miss Hale." The doctor was perhaps 40, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the no-nonsense manner of someone who'd fought hard for her profession. Women doctors were rare enough that her presence alone was remarkable. "Miss Hale," Dr. Brennan said as Clara came to the door, "I understand you've been through an ordeal. I'm here to document your physical condition and assess your mental state. The evaluation will take several hours and may be uncomfortable. Are you willing to proceed?" Clara glanced at Ethan, who nodded encouragingly. "I am." "Good. Is there a private room where we can work?" They used the spare bedroom, the same room where Clara had slept that first night. Ethan tried to focus on ranch work while the examination proceeded, but found himself pacing the kitchen, listening to the murmur of voices from down the hall. Lucas watched him with concern. "Is the doctor going to help Miss Clara?" "I hope so, buddy." "Will she have to go away again?" The question hit Ethan hard. Lucas had already lost his mother, had already survived Clara disappearing once. The thought of putting him through that again made Ethan's chest tight. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she can stay." "Good." Lucas returned to his drawing, seemingly satisfied. "I like her. She tells the best stories." 3 hours later, Dr. Brennan emerged from the spare room with Clara behind her, looking exhausted but composed. The doctor's expression gave nothing away. "Well?" Ethan couldn't keep the anxiety from his voice. Dr. Brennan set her medical bag on the table and pulled out a notebook. "Miss Hale shows clear evidence of physical trauma consistent with her account. Multiple healed lacerations on her feet, bruising in various stages of healing on her arms and ribs, evidence of malnutrition suggesting prolonged stress and inadequate care." "And her mental state?" "Entirely sound. She's articulate, rational, shows no signs of hysteria or delusion. Her memory is clear, her reasoning sharp. Any lawyer who tries to claim she's incompetent will have to contend with my professional opinion that she is nothing of the sort." Dr. Brennan closed her notebook. "I'll prepare a full report for Judge Crawford. It should carry considerable weight." Relief flooded through Ethan. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm simply documenting facts. Whether those facts are enough to overcome Marcus Thornton's influence remains to be seen." The doctor softened slightly. "But for what it's worth, I believe Miss Hale. I've seen too many women trapped in situations like hers. If there's any justice in our legal system, she'll get her freedom." Mrs. Henderson had been standing quietly by the window, watching the road. Now she turned. "Judge Crawford has agreed to hear the case. 2 weeks from today in Denver. Can you be ready? 2 weeks to prepare for a trial that could determine the rest of Clara's life. 2 weeks to gather evidence, prepare witnesses, find the money Ethan didn't have. 2 weeks before everything either came together or fell apart." "We'll be ready," Ethan said. After the women left, Clara sank into a chair, trembling with exhaustion. The examination had taken everything out of her, forcing her to relive her trauma, to put words to experiences she'd tried to bury. "How are you?" Ethan asked gently. "Scared, hopeful, exhausted." She managed a weak smile. "All of it at once." He pulled a chair close and took her hand. Her fingers were ice cold despite the warm kitchen. 2 weeks. Then this is done, one way or another." "One way or another," she repeated. "I keep thinking about what happens if we lose. If the judge decides Marcus's legal claim is stronger than my right to choose my own life. Then we run. We take Lucas and we go somewhere Marcus can't find us. Canada, maybe. Or Mexico." "You'd do that? Give up everything you've built here?" "I already told you I would." Ethan squeezed her hand. This ranch, this land, it's important to me. But it's just property. You're not. Lucas isn't. If I have to choose between the land and the people I love, there's no contest. Clara's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they looked like relief rather than despair. 2 weeks, she said. We can survive 2 weeks. We can survive anything, Ethan said. We already have. That night, after Lucas was asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan sat at his desk calculating numbers that didn't add up. The doctor's fee, travel to Denver, legal costs, witnesses who would need compensation for their time, it all added up to more than he had, even if he sold his best breeding stock. He'd have to mortgage the ranch. There was no way around it. The thought of putting his land, his home, his son's inheritance at risk made him sick. But looking across the room at where Clara sat mending one of Lucas's shirts by lamplight, her face peaceful for the first time in days, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Some things were worth any price. Clara looked up and caught him watching. What are you thinking about? Money, and how we're going to make this work. She set down the mending. I've been thinking about that too. After the trial, if we win, I could work. I'm educated. I can teach or keep books or... Clara, I know what you're going to say, that it's not necessary, that you'll provide. But Ethan, I don't want to be provided for anymore. I want to contribute, to be a partner, not a dependent. She stood and came to his desk. For 2 years, I had no control over my own life. Everything was decided for me. I won't live like that again, even with someone I love. Ethan understood. She needed agency, needed to prove to herself that she could stand on her own feet. All right, if that's what you want. It is. She looked at the numbers spread across his desk. How bad is it? Bad enough. I'll need to mortgage about half the ranch to cover everything. Claire went pale. Half? It's the only way, but if we win, if you're free, we can work to pay it off. It'll take years, but it's possible. And if we lose? Then Marcus will probably foreclose out of spite, and we'll have to start over somewhere else. He met her eyes. Either way, we're in this together. She bent and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with determination. Then we'd better win. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Ethan mortgaged the ranch through a banker in the next county, unwilling to give Marcus any advance warning of their legal strategy. The money came through with days to spare, enough to cover Dr. Brennan's fee, travel expenses, and a retainer for the lawyer Mrs. Henderson had found willing to represent Clara. His name was Theodore Walsh, a former prosecutor who'd grown disgusted with the way wealth corrupted justice. He was 52, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for taking difficult cases and a win record that made Marcus's lawyers nervous. I won't lie to you, Walsh told them during their first meeting in his Denver office. This is an uphill battle. Annulment cases are difficult under the best circumstances. When the husband is Marcus Thornton, they become nearly impossible. But not completely impossible, Clara said. No, not completely. Walsh spread papers across his desk. We have several advantages. Dr. Brennan's medical report is thorough and damning. The testimony from Thornton's former employees establishes a pattern of controlling behavior. And Judge Crawford's reputation for fairness gives us a better chance than we'd have with most judges. What about Marcus's lawyers? Ethan asked. They'll attack Clara's credibility at every turn. They'll argue she went willingly into the marriage, enjoyed its benefits for 2 years, and is now trying to escape because she found a more appealing option. Walsh's gaze moved between Ethan and Clara. They'll make your prior relationship the centerpiece of their defense. They'll paint you as adulterers, conspirators, people who planned this from the beginning. Clara's hand found Ethan's under the table. We can handle that. Can you? Because they won't be polite about it. They'll ask explicit questions about your relationship, about intimacy, about whether you remained faithful to your husband. Walsh's expression was sympathetic but firm. I need you both to understand what you're walking into. This will be humiliating and invasive, and there's no guarantee we'll win. We understand, Ethan said. Tell us what we need to do. The trial was set for a Thursday morning in early March. Ethan left Lucas with Mrs. Henderson, who'd agreed to watch the boy during the proceedings, and rode to Denver with Clara the day before. They took rooms in a modest boarding house near the courthouse. separate rooms to avoid any appearance of impropriety, though Ethan hated leaving Clara alone knowing how frightened she was. That night, unable to sleep, he knocked softly on her door. She answered in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes red from crying. "I can't stop thinking about tomorrow," she said. "About having to face Marcus in court, having to say everything out loud in front of strangers." Ethan stepped inside and closed the door. Propriety be damned. "You don't have to do this. We can still run." "No. Running means he wins. Running means he gets to keep doing this to other women." Clara moved to the window, looking out at the dark Denver streets. "I keep thinking about May, about Marcus's first wife who died under suspicious circumstances, about how many others there might have been. If I don't stop him now, who will? That's not your responsibility, isn't it? I have the chance to speak up, to tell the truth. If I don't take it, I'm as complicit as everyone who knew and stayed silent." Ethan came to stand beside her. "You're braver than anyone I've ever known. I'm terrified. Brave people usually are. They just don't let the fear stop them." He took her hand, feeling it tremble in his. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you." They stood together at the window for a long time, watching the gaslit streets, gathering strength for what was coming. When Ethan finally left, returning to his own room, he lay awake until dawn, running through testimony in his mind, preparing for every possible attack Marcus's lawyers might launch. The courthouse was an imposing brick building with marble columns and an air of stern authority. Ethan arrived early with Clara and Walsh, wanting to claim their space before Marcus appeared. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan had expected, with wooden benches for spectators and a raised platform where Judge Crawford would preside. Mrs. Henderson was already there, sitting in the front row with Dr. Brennan beside her. Other faces Ethan recognized filled the benches. Martha Chen and her niece May, Daniel Morrison, and several other ranchers. The lawyer who'd worked briefly for the Thorntons. People who'd come to support Clara, to bear witness, to stand against Marcus's power with nothing but their truth. Marcus arrived precisely at 9, with an entourage that made Ethan's stomach turn. 3 lawyers in expensive suits, a doctor whose credentials Walsh had already investigated and found questionable, and several well-dressed men and women who were presumably character witnesses. Marcus himself looked perfectly composed, his dark suit immaculate, his expression one of wounded dignity rather than anger. He looked across the courtroom at Clara, and Ethan saw her stiffen. But she didn't look away, didn't flinch. She met Marcus's gaze steadily until he was the one who turned aside. Judge Crawford entered at precisely 9:30, a tall man with white hair and fierce eyebrows that gave him the look of an eagle. Everyone rose as he took his seat, and the bailiff called the court to order. "We are here," Judge Crawford began, his voice carrying easily through the courtroom, "to consider a petition for annulment of marriage between Clara Hale and Marcus Thornton. This is a serious matter involving questions of consent, coercion, and the nature of the marital contract itself. I expect all parties to conduct themselves with dignity and respect for this court's authority." His gaze swept the room, lingering on Marcus's lawyers in a way that suggested he knew exactly what kind of tactics they might employ. "Mr. Walsh, you may begin." Walsh stood, straightening his coat. "Your Honor, we will prove that my client, Clara Hale, was forced into marriage through threats against her family, that she was kept in isolation and subjected to systematic manipulation, and that the marriage was never consummated due to her husband's violence when she refused his advances. We will show that this was not a marriage in any meaningful sense, but a form of imprisonment disguised by legal ceremony." Marcus's lead lawyer, a silver-haired man named Hutchins, rose immediately. "Your Honor, these are inflammatory accusations without basis in fact. Mr. Thornton is a respected businessman who entered into a legal marriage with Miss Hale's full consent. What we have here is simply a case of buyer's remorse. A young woman who enjoyed the benefits of wealth for 2 years and is now seeking to escape her obligations because she's found another man." "We'll let the evidence speak to that," Judge Crawford said dryly. "Mr. Walsh, call your first witness." "I call Clara Hale to the stand." Clara stood, her movements graceful despite the tremor Ethan could see in her hands. She wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her choose, modest and respectable without being ostentatious. As she took her seat in the witness box and placed her hand on the Bible to swear her oath, Ethan sent every prayer he knew that she would find the strength to tell her story. Walsh approached her gently, his questions designed to ease her into the testimony. He asked about her background, her family, her relationship with Ethan before Marcus appeared. Clara answered clearly, her voice steady, painting a picture of a normal life interrupted by her father's financial crisis. Then Walsh moved to the marriage itself. "Miss Hale, please tell the court how you came to be engaged to Marcus Thornton." Clara took a breath. "My father owed substantial debts to various creditors. He was facing bankruptcy and possible imprisonment. Marcus came to our house and offered to buy those debts in exchange for my agreement to marry him." "Did you want to marry him?" "No, I barely knew him. I was in love with someone else." "Did you tell your father this?" "Yes, but he said we had no choice, that if I refused, our family would be destroyed." Clara's voice remained steady, but Ethan could see her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the witness box. "Marcus made it very clear what would happen if I said no. My father would go to prison. My mother and I would be homeless. He was very detailed about it. So you agreed under duress." "I agreed to save my family. That's not the same as wanting to marry him." Hutchins was on his feet immediately. "Objection. The witness is characterizing her own motivations rather than stating facts." "Overruled," Judge Crawford said. "The witness's state of mind is relevant to the question of consent. Continue, Mr. Walsh." Walsh walked Clara through the 18 months of her engagement, asking about the isolation, the constant supervision, the tutors and lessons designed to remake her into Marcus's ideal wife. Clara described it all with increasing confidence, her voice growing stronger as she spoke truths that had been locked inside her for so long. "And during this time, did you attempt to contact Mr. Cole?" "Yes. I wrote him repeatedly, at least twice a week for the first 6 months, then weekly after that when I never received a response." "Why didn't you stop writing if you believed he wasn't responding?" "Because I couldn't believe he would abandon me completely. I kept thinking maybe the letters were delayed or he was waiting for the right moment or something. I couldn't accept that he'd just stopped caring." Clara's eyes found Ethan in the courtroom. "I know now that he never received my letters. The housekeeper Marcus hired destroyed them all." "Do you have proof of this?" "I found them. All 47 letters, unopened, in a box under her bed 3 days before the wedding." Hutchins stood again. "Objection. This alleged evidence is not available for examination. We have only the witness's word that these letters existed at all." "The housekeeper's employment records show she was hired by Mr. Thornton specifically to supervise Miss Hale," Walsh countered. "And we have testimony from other household staff about her unusual level of access to Miss Hale's correspondence." Judge Crawford made a note. "I'll allow it, but Mr. Hutchins' point is noted. The lack of physical evidence is a weakness." Walsh continued, guiding Clara through the wedding day, the ceremony she'd endured while planning her escape, the moment when Marcus had tried to force himself on her and she'd known she had to run. "Tell the court about your wedding night, Miss Hale." Clara's composure finally cracked slightly, her voice dropping. "We went to the house Marcus had prepared. He was drinking, celebrating. He said it was time for me to fulfill my wifely duties. I tried to explain that I needed more time, that I wasn't ready. He said I'd had 18 months to get ready, and he was done waiting." "What happened then?" "He grabbed my arms and tried to force me toward the bedroom. I fought him. He backhanded me, said I was being hysterical, that all brides were nervous, but I'd learned to enjoy it." Tears streamed down Clara's face now, but her voice remained clear. "I knew then that if I stayed, if I let him, if I gave in, I'd never escape. So when he went to pour another drink, I ran to the bedroom, climbed out the window, and didn't stop running until I collapsed on the road where Ethan found me." "No further questions, Your Honor." Hutchins approached the witness box like a predator circling prey. His questions were sharp, designed to trap Clara in contradictions or force her to admit to behavior that could be painted as improper. "Miss Hale, you testified that you were in love with Mr. Cole before your engagement to Mr. Thornton. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And yet you agreed to marry another man. That suggests your love was not particularly strong." "It suggests I love my family enough to sacrifice my own happiness for theirs. Or it suggests you were attracted to Mr. Thornton's wealth and social position. If I'd wanted wealth, I wouldn't have run away from it in bare feet." Several people in the courtroom chuckled, and Hutchins' face darkened. You lived in Mr. Thornton's household for 18 months. You enjoyed fine clothes, good food, comfortable accommodations. I enjoyed a cell with better furnishings. It was still a cell. You were free to leave at any time. Was I? With guards at every door and my mother's safety depended on my compliance. Clara leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Mr. Hutchins, if someone holds a gun to your family's head and offers you a choice between their death and your imprisonment, is that really freedom? Judge Crawford's eyebrows rose, and Ethan saw something like approval flicker across his face. Hutchins changed tactics. You claim Mr. Thornton struck you on your wedding night, yet Dr. Brennan's examination found no evidence of facial bruising. Because I ran the same night, the bruise hadn't fully formed yet, but she did find bruises on my arms where he grabbed me. Bruises that could have come from any number of sources. They came from my husband trying to force me into his bed against my will. The bluntness of Clara's statement seemed to catch Hutchins off guard. He recovered quickly, but Ethan could see him recalculating his approach. Miss Hale, isn't it true that you and Mr. Cole have been intimate since your return to his ranch? Walsh was on his feet. Objection! That question is inappropriate and irrelevant. It speaks to the witness's credibility and her true motivations for seeking annulment. Judge Crawford considered. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Hutchins. Hutchins turned back to Clara. Well, Miss Hale, have you and Mr. Cole engaged in intimate relations since you fled your lawful husband? Clara's face flushed, but she held Hutchins' gaze. No. Ethan has been nothing but respectful and proper. I've been sleeping in the spare room. We've had no physical relationship beyond what would be appropriate between friends. Friends, Hutchins said skeptically. You expect this court to believe that you're living under the same roof as a man you profess to love and nothing improper has occurred? Yes, because unlike your client, Ethan Cole respects my autonomy and doesn't see my presence in his home as an invitation to violate my boundaries. The courtroom went silent. Even Hutchins seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Crawford cleared his throat. Do you have further questions for this witness, Mr. Hutchins? No, Your Honor. Then step down, Miss Hale. Clara returned to her seat beside Walsh, visibly shaking from the ordeal. Ethan wanted to go to her, to offer comfort, but Walsh had been clear that any public display of affection would only fuel Marcus's lawyer's narrative. The rest of the morning was taken up with other witnesses. Dr. Brennan presented her medical findings, explaining the evidence of malnutrition, the pattern of bruising consistent with restraint and violence, the psychological trauma Clara exhibited. Marcus's doctor tried to counter this by suggesting Clara was prone to hysteria and self-harm. But under Walsh's cross-examination, he admitted he'd never actually examined Clara and was basing his opinions on Marcus's second-hand descriptions. May testified about the fear that permeated the Thornton household, about screams she'd heard from Marcus's private quarters, about the first Mrs. Thornton's suspicious death. Hutchins tried to discredit her as a biased witness with a grudge against her former employer, but May held firm, her quiet dignity more powerful than any dramatic testimony could have been. The court broke for lunch, and Ethan finally had a chance to speak with Clara alone in a small room Walsh had arranged for their use. You were incredible, he told her. The way you stood up to Hutchins, the way you refused to let him twist your words. I wanted to run, Clara admitted. Every time he asked another question, I wanted to stand up and walk out and never look back. But you didn't. You stayed and told the truth. The truth doesn't always win in court. Maybe not, but it's all we have. They ate sandwiches that neither of them tasted, both too anxious about the afternoon session to think about food. Walsh came in partway through to prepare Ethan for his testimony. They're going to paint you as a jealous rival who convinced Clara to betray her marriage. Be honest, be direct, and don't let them provoke you into anger. Marcus wants you to lose your temper, to prove you're unstable. I'll keep my temper. Good. Because if you don't, we lose everything. The afternoon session began with Ethan's testimony. He told the court about finding Clara in the road, about her condition, about Marcus's arrival and threats. Walsh led him through the discovery of James's betrayal, establishing that Clara's letters had indeed been intercepted, that her isolation had been complete. Then it was Hutchins' turn. Mr. Cole, You've testified that you and Miss Hale had an understanding before her engagement to Mr. Thornton. Would you characterize that as a romantic relationship? Yes. Did you propose marriage to her? Not formally, no, but we discussed a future together. Yet when she disappeared, you made no effort to find her. The accusation stung because it was true. I believed she'd chosen to leave. I had no reason to think otherwise. No reason except that a woman you claimed to love had vanished without explanation. Most men would have searched for answers. I was hurt and angry. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made. Assumptions that proved convenient when she returned and needed your help. Ethan's hands clenched on the arms of the witness chair. There was nothing convenient about any of this. Clara showed up half-frozen, injured, terrified. I helped her because she needed help, not because I had some ulterior motive. And yet you stand to gain significantly if this annulment is granted. You get the woman you wanted, free of any legal entanglements. I stand to lose my ranch, Ethan shot back. I've mortgaged half my land to pay for this trial. If that's gaining significantly, I'd hate to see what you consider a loss. Judge Crawford intervened. Mr. Hutchins, do you have questions relevant to the petition, or are you simply trying to impugn the witness's character? I'm establishing motive, Your Honor. Mr. Cole has every reason to support Miss Hale's claims, whether they're true or not. And Mr. Thornton has every reason to deny them, Walsh interjected. That's why we've brought independent witnesses and medical evidence. The questioning continued for another hour, but Ethan held his ground, refusing to be baited into anger or trapped into contradictions. When he finally stepped down, he felt wrung out but satisfied. He'd told his truth. The rest was up to Judge Crawford. Marcus took the stand late in the afternoon. He presented himself as the wronged husband, the generous benefactor who'd saved Clara's family from ruin only to be betrayed and humiliated. His testimony was smooth, practiced, designed to paint Clara as unstable and ungrateful, but Walsh's cross-examination cut through the polish. Mr. Thornton, you testified that you courted Miss Hale properly and that she agreed to the marriage willingly, yet you've also admitted that her agreement came only after you'd bought her father's debts and made clear the consequences of refusal. How do you reconcile those statements? I offered her family help in their time of need. That she chose to show gratitude through marriage was her decision. A decision made under threat of her father's imprisonment. A decision made with full knowledge of the circumstances, yes. And when she asked for more time on your wedding night, you refused. She was being irrational. All brides experience nervousness. So you grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises and struck her when she continued to resist. I did no such thing. She fell during her hysterical episode. I was trying to calm her. She fell backward and somehow sustained bruises on the front of both arms in the exact pattern of finger marks. Marcus's composure cracked slightly. She's lying to justify her adultery. We've established there was no adultery. Dr. Brennan's examination confirmed Miss Hale was intact, had not engaged in intimate relations with anyone. The courtroom stirred at this revelation. Marcus's face flushed dark red. That proves nothing. She could have been intimate with Cole before the marriage. Could have been, but wasn't. Dr. Brennan's testimony was clear on that point. Walsh moved closer to the witness box. You kept Miss Hale isolated for 18 months. You controlled her correspondence, her movements, her access to the outside world. You employed a housekeeper specifically to intercept her letters. Those are not the actions of a loving husband, but of a jailer. Objection. Hutchins was on his feet. Counsel is testifying rather than questioning. Sustained. Mr. Walsh, ask questions. Mr. Thornton, did you or did you not hire Mrs. Patterson with instructions to monitor Miss Hale's correspondence? I hired her to help Clara adjust to her new station in life. That's not what I asked. Did you instruct her to monitor Clara's correspondence? Marcus hesitated just long enough to damn himself. I may have mentioned that Clara was prone to inappropriate friendships and that her letters should be reviewed for her own protection. Reviewed, by which you mean intercepted and destroyed. I meant supervised, without her knowledge or consent, for her own good. Walsh let that statement hang in the air for a moment, letting the court absorb the implications of a man who believed he had the right to control every aspect of his wife's life for her own good. No further questions. The trial concluded with closing arguments. Hutchins painted Clara as a wayward woman who'd made her choice and now wanted to escape the consequences. Walsh countered with a passionate defense of Clara's right to autonomy, her right to refuse a marriage built on coercion, her right to escape a man who saw her as property rather than a person. Judge Crawford listened to both sides with his fierce eagle expression, making notes but giving no indication of which way he was leaning. When both lawyers had finished, he sat back in his chair. "This court will take the matter under advisement. I'll render my decision within 3 days. Court is adjourned." The 3 days that followed were torture. Ethan and Clara remained in Denver, not wanting to risk the journey home and back if the judge called them to return quickly. They stayed in their separate rooms at the boarding house, though Ethan spent most evenings with Clara, both of them too anxious to be alone. Mrs. Henderson visited daily, bringing food and encouragement. "Judge Crawford is thorough," she told them. "He'll consider every piece of evidence carefully. That's good for us." "Or it means he's trying to find a way to rule against us without appearing unjust," Clara said. "My cousin is many things, but he's not a coward. If he believes you were coerced, he'll say so. Consequences be damned." On the morning of the third day, word came that Judge Crawford had reached his decision. Ethan and Clara returned to the courthouse with Walsh, finding the courtroom even more crowded than before. Word had spread about the trial, and people were curious to see how a judge would rule when a poor woman challenged a wealthy man's right to his wife. Marcus was already there with his lawyers, his expression confident. He'd spent the last 3 days calling in favors, Ethan had heard, pressuring business associates who might have influence with the judge. It was the kind of thing men with his resources did instinctively, unable to imagine that money couldn't solve every problem. Judge Crawford entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. The judge settled into his chair, papers arranged before him, and surveyed the courtroom with those penetrating eyes. "I've given this matter considerable thought," he began. "Marriage is the foundation of civilized society, and courts do not dissolve marriages lightly. However, marriage must also be based on mutual consent freely given. When that consent is obtained through coercion, through threats against family, through systematic manipulation and control, it becomes questionable whether a true marriage exists at all." Ethan's heart pounded so hard he could barely hear the judge's next words. The evidence presented shows that Clara Hale was placed in an impossible situation. Her father's debts created a crisis that Marcus Thornton exploited, offering to solve the problem in exchange for marriage to a woman he barely knew. This was not courtship. This was a business transaction in which Miss Hale was the commodity. Marcus shifted in his seat, his lawyers exchanging worried glances. Furthermore, the testimony and medical evidence demonstrate that Miss Hale was kept in isolation, her correspondence monitored and intercepted, her movements restricted. Mr. Thornton's own testimony revealed that he believed he had the right to control every aspect of his wife's life, including who she could write to and what she could say. This is not the behavior of a loving husband, but of someone who views marriage as ownership. Clara's hand found Ethan's, squeezing tight. Finally, there is the matter of the wedding night. Mr. Thornton's version of events is contradicted by medical evidence showing bruising consistent with restraint and violence. Dr. Brennan's professional opinion that these injuries could not have been sustained in a fall is persuasive and unrebutted by any credible evidence. Judge Crawford looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Thornton, you have the resources to make almost anything happen in this territory, but you do not have the right to purchase a human being, no matter how you disguise the transaction. Slavery was abolished in this country, and I will not sanction its return in the form of coerced marriage." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Hutchins was on his feet, but Judge Crawford waved him down. "The petition for annulment is granted. The marriage between Clara Hale and Marcus Thornton is hereby dissolved on the grounds of coercion and lack of genuine consent. Miss Hale is free to return to her own name and is under no legal obligation to Mr. Thornton whatsoever." Clara's sob of relief was audible throughout the courtroom. Ethan pulled her into his arms, not caring what anyone thought, feeling 2 years of fear and uncertainty finally releasing its grip. "Furthermore," Judge Crawford continued, raising his voice over the noise, "I am ordering an investigation into Mr. Thornton's business practices, particularly regarding other marriages or engagements that may have been similarly coerced. This court will not turn a blind eye to systematic abuse disguised as respectability." Marcus's face had gone from red to white. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly, and walked out of the courtroom without a word, his lawyers scrambling to follow. "Miss Hale," Judge Crawford said, his tone softening, "you showed remarkable courage in bringing this case forward. I hope that courage inspires other women who find themselves in similar situations to seek justice rather than accepting their fate as inevitable." Clara could barely speak through her tears. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you." The courtroom slowly emptied, people stopping to congratulate Clara, to shake Ethan's hand, to express their support. Mrs. Henderson embraced them both, tears streaming down her usually composed face. Walsh packed up his papers with a satisfied smile, having won what everyone had said was an unwinnable case. Outside the courthouse, spring sunlight warmed the Denver streets. The snow had melted, leaving everything fresh and new. Ethan and Clara stood on the steps, breathing in the clean air, feeling the weight of the past 2 years finally lifting. "It's over," Clara said wonderingly. "It's really over. You're free. We're free." She turned to him, her face glowing despite the tears still wet on her cheeks. "We can start over, build something real this time, without secrets or stolen letters or people deciding our fate for us. Is that what you want? To start over with me?" "It's all I've wanted for 2 years." Clara took both his hands. "I know we have a lot to work through. I know the ranch is mortgaged and money will be tight and it won't be easy, but I don't need easy, Ethan. I just need honest." "I can give you honest." He pulled her close, right there on the courthouse steps with Denver watching. "I love you, Clara Hale. I want to marry you properly this time, with no coercion, no threats, just 2 people choosing each other." "Is that a proposal?" "It's a promise. When you're ready, when you've had time to figure out who you are outside of what everyone's expected you to be, ask me again." Clara laughed, bright and free. "What if I'm ready now? What if I know exactly who I am, and she's someone who wants to marry you? Then we'll do it right. We'll wait a proper amount of time, let the scandal die down, and we'll get married with Lucas standing beside us, and everyone knowing it's our choice, made freely." They rode back to the ranch 3 days later, taking their time, stopping to enjoy the journey in a way neither of them had been able to enjoy anything for far too long. When they finally crested the ridge and saw the ranch buildings in the valley below, Ethan felt a surge of relief. Whatever happened next, they'd face it here, on land that was still his, in a home that could finally become theirs. Lucas came running from the house where Mrs. Henderson had been watching him, his face lit with joy. "Papa, Miss Clara, did you win?" "We won, buddy." Ethan scooped his son up, feeling the boy's solid weight, his unconditional trust. "Miss Clara is free. Does that mean she's staying? If she wants to." Lucas looked at Clara with those serious eyes. "Do you want to?" Clara knelt beside him, her blue dress dusty from travel, but her expression radiant. "Very much. Would that be all right with you?" "It would be good. The house is nicer when you're here. Papa smiles more." Ethan felt his throat tighten. Out of the mouths of children, indeed. That night, after Lucas was asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The mountains rose black against the deep blue, and somewhere in the valley a coyote called, lonely and wild. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked. "The letters, the ones you wrote that I never got." Ethan took her hand. "I keep wondering what they said, what I missed." "They said I loved you, that I was scared, that I needed you." Clara squeezed his fingers. "They said all the things I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you instead of just writing about." "I like that plan better anyway." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came when 2 people knew each other deeply enough that words weren't always necessary. Clara leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder and he wrapped his arm around her, feeling the rightness of it in a way that went beyond logic or reason. "Ethan." "Yeah?" "Thank you for believing me, for fighting for me, for giving me a place to stand when I had nothing. You gave me something too. You gave me back hope, the belief that sometimes things work out, that sometimes the right people find their way back to each other despite everything trying to keep them apart." Clara turned to look at him, her face serious in the starlight. "I don't know who I am anymore. The Clara who left 2 years ago, the one who endured those 18 months, the one who climbed out that window. They all feel like different people. I need time to figure out which parts of them I want to keep and which parts I need to let go. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. We've wasted 2 years. I'm not wasting another day. He kissed her forehead gently. When you're ready, when you know who you are and what you want, I'll be here. Weeks turned into months. Spring came fully, painting the valley in wildflowers and new grass. Clara worked alongside Ethan, learning the ranch in a way she never had before, discovering she liked the physical labor, the tangible results of hard work. She took over the books, finding she had a head for numbers and organization that helped streamline operations Ethan had been managing haphazardly. Letters arrived regularly from Denver. Mrs. Henderson wrote that Judge Crawford's investigation had uncovered 3 other women who'd been pressured into engagements with wealthy men using similar tactics to Marcus's. The scandal had rocked Denver society, forcing reforms in how marriage contracts were regulated and how women could seek legal protection from coercion. Marcus himself had left Colorado entirely, his reputation in ruins, his business partners distancing themselves. The last Mrs. Henderson had heard, he'd gone to San Francisco, where presumably no one knew about his failed attempt to keep a wife through force. On a warm evening in late May, with summer approaching and the land green and alive, Clara found Ethan in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. "I've been thinking," she said, leaning against the stall door. "About what?" "About who I am. About what I want." She smiled. "I think I've figured it out." Ethan straightened, giving her his full attention. "And?" "I'm someone who wants to build a life here with you and Lucas. I want to work this ranch and raise children and grow old watching sunsets from that porch. I want to be your partner, your wife, your equal." Clara moved closer. "I want to choose you freely and completely, with no one forcing my hand or stealing my words or deciding my fate for me." "Are you sure? Because once you choose, I'm not letting go. Not for anything." "I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything." She took his hands, dusty from ranch work and strong from years of labor. "Ethan Cole, will you marry me?" He laughed, surprised and delighted. "That's supposed to be my line. I'm tired of waiting for things to happen to me. I'd rather make them happen." She smiled. "So what do you say? Will you take a chance on a woman who's been through hell and back and somehow came out believing in happy endings? I'd marry you right now if we could find a preacher." "Next week is soon enough. Mrs. Henderson is arranging everything. Small ceremony, just the people who stood by us. Nothing fancy, nothing forced, just honest." Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her close in the quiet barn, with the horses shuffling nearby and the mare watching them with patient eyes. "Next week, then. And every week after that, for the rest of our lives." The wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in early June. They stood in the same courthouse where Judge Crawford had freed Clara, with the judge himself officiating. Lucas stood between them, holding the rings, his face solemn with the importance of his role. Mrs. Henderson and Dr. Brennan served as witnesses, along with Daniel Morrison and Martha Chen, and all the others who'd helped them win their freedom. Clara wore a simple white dress, nothing like the elaborate gown Marcus had forced her into. Ethan wore his best suit, the one he saved for important occasions. When they spoke their vows, they did so clearly and firmly, 2 people who understood exactly what they were promising and chose it anyway. "I promise to believe you," Clara said, "even when the truth is hard to hear. I promise to stand beside you, not behind you or in front of you, but alongside you as an equal partner. I promise to choose you every day, in every way that matters." "I promise to fight for you," Ethan responded, "but also to let you fight for yourself when that's what you need. I promise to trust you with my heart, even though it's been broken before, because I believe some things are worth the risk. I promise to build a life with you that's ours, not anyone else's idea of what we should be." When Judge Crawford pronounced them married and told Ethan he could kiss his bride, the kiss was sweet and soft and full of promises kept and futures earned. The celebration afterward was simple. A dinner at Mrs. Betts Henderson's house, with good food and better company, with laughter that came easily and joy that was genuine. Lucas fell asleep on Clara's lap halfway through dessert, and she held him gently, this boy who'd welcomed her back without question, who'd shown her that trust could be rebuilt, and families could be chosen. That night, riding back to the ranch under a sky full of stars, Clara leaned against Ethan in the wagon seat and felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. The road ahead wound through familiar territory, leading to a house that was truly home now, to a life she'd chosen rather than one that had been chosen for her. "No regrets?" Ethan asked quietly. "Not a single one." She looked up at the stars, the same stars that had watched her run through the snow in bare feet, that had seen her broken and terrified and desperate. It's strange. If everything hadn't happened exactly as it did, if the letters had gotten through, or if James hadn't intercepted them, or if Marcus had been a different kind of man, we wouldn't be here now. We wouldn't have fought for this, earned this. You think suffering was necessary? No, but I think surviving it taught me who I am, in a way nothing else could have. She took his hand. I'm someone who doesn't give up, someone who runs toward freedom instead of accepting captivity, someone who believes in second chances and hard-won happiness. They reached the ranch as the moon rose, painting everything silver. Ethan carried Lucas inside while Clara followed, moving through rooms that were finally, truly hers. She paused in the kitchen, remembering that first morning when she'd sat at this table drinking coffee while Marcus's threat loomed over them, when the future had seemed impossible and hope a foolish luxury. Now hope felt earned, real, sustainable. Ethan found her there a few minutes later, standing by the window looking out at the valley. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cole." Clara smiled, leaning back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, the steady beat of his heart. "I've been home for a while now. This just makes it official." They stood together watching the valley settle into night, the land they'd fought to keep, the life they'd chosen against all odds. Somewhere in the darkness, that same coyote called again. But this time it didn't sound lonely. It sounded wild and free, like a celebration of survival, of persistence, of the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Clara had been the barefoot bride running through the snow, desperate and alone. Now she was simply Clara Cole, standing in her own kitchen with her husband's arms around her and her stepson sleeping peacefully down the hall, and a future that belonged to them and no one else. The past no longer owned them. The stolen years, the intercepted letters, the forced marriage and desperate flight, all of it had happened, had shaped them, but didn't define them anymore. They'd survived it, overcome it, and built something true from the ashes of what had been destroyed. And standing there in the quiet ranch house, with moonlight streaming through the windows, Clara finally understood what freedom really meant. Not just the absence of constraint, but the presence of choice. The ability to decide her own path, write her own story, build her own life with the people she loved. She'd run through the snow to reach this moment. She'd climbed out windows and walked until her feet bled and stood in courtrooms exposing her pain to strangers. She'd fought for her freedom with everything she had, and it had been worth it. Every painful step, every terrifying moment, every time she'd wanted to give up but hadn't. All of it had led here, to this kitchen, this man, this life she'd chosen. "Ethan," she said softly. "Yeah?" "I love you, not because I need you or because you saved me or because I have nowhere else to go. I love you because you're you and I'm me, and we're better together than we ever were apart." He turned her in his arms, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. That's all I ever wanted to hear. When he kissed her, it tasted like promises kept and futures earned, like second chances and hard-won joy. It tasted like home. Outside, the valley slept peacefully under the stars. Inside, two people who'd survived the worst the world could throw at them and still chose love, still chose each other, still chose to believe in happy endings, finally found their rest. The barefoot bride had run through the snow and found her way home at last.